Welcome to the Jamal Thomas Morning Show. My name is Jamal Thomas. Welcome indeed to my show. I'm glad you all can join me. As I always point out, every show you could be anywhere. So I am glad that you found yourself here with me. A lot of news over the course of the weekend, and really interesting news in so many cases. Apparently, the conversation between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin may take place sooner than expected, even before he gets into the White House. And that is a conversation that, look, somebody like me who thought this war has been an utter, complete catastrophe, I look forward to that conversation. I look forward to some of the things that Donald Trump has been saying that are sane and rational in the context of a political orthodoxy that has not been sane and rational. So, again, the issue is always, how do you end it? And that is where the rubber is going to be thrown. And I have to be honest with you, I don't quite know how that looks. I've had several people who've come on the show who've had conversations about this, people who are knowledgeable, who've been paying attention to this from the beginning and even beyond the beginning of this. And even they don't necessarily have a clear answer on how to end it. But at the very least, I guess starting off with somebody who seems to have that intent is a positive thing. That is a good thing. But in Romania, there are massive amounts of protests. And the protests are pretty much as obvious as to why. A political candidate comes on the scene. The political candidate comes out of nowhere. That political candidate galvanizes the population to back him in a political race, in a government that said they care about, representative government, democracy, et cetera, et cetera. He wins the first round in spades. There's screaming that there's cheating afoot, and the dastardly Russians got involved in order to push him over the finish line because he was pro-Romanian. I want Romania to win. I don't believe that us having military bases, or for that matter, being in some kind of war, is in the best interest of Romania. Ergo, I am going to be against the Ukraine war and against any pushing into that war. Come to find out, the court comes out of nowhere and kills the election. Just puts a knife in it. And they said, well, there were TikTok ads that were, a little suspicious, a little dubious. So we decided to end the election in Romania. Pending an investigation, you find out the Russians had nothing to do with it, and not just having nothing to do with it, it was their own government or elements of the government that had put those ads out of money for those ads to take place. And yet they destroyed the Romanian election. That is a coup. I don't know another word for it. It's a coup. Call it what it is. And so the people are protesting the fact that their government has fundamentally been overthrown. Karl Gorgetsky should be in office as we speak right now, but instead he has to have political agitation to take what should have already been given to him. So there is that. Like I said, there is news afoot all across. You have Michael Cohen begging for a pardon. The LAFD, the Los Angeles Fire Department, come to find out that there were cuts to the fire department, and significant cuts. Apparently, the fire department in Los Angeles had been begging for additional resources, pointing out that they in a time where they require more resources, meaning they're getting more calls for help, more requests for assistance at a time where they have less capability to accommodate it. And now you have fires that look like the third level of hell that they are effectively dealing with and have found themselves to be lacking in dealing with it. Yeah, the governor, Newsom, is, you can imagine, somewhat of a tough spot because at the end of the day, it's always going to be put back to who's in charge. And that is going to go to Gavin Newsom. Newsom, in order to deal with the fact that he's in charge and not wanting it to land on him, has come out saying they are going to push and push hard for California 2.0. Well, you can imagine the reason he wants to push for California 2.0 is because he doesn't want to deal with the fact that 1.0 is just burned to the ground. So there's that. There's a lot of news, as I point out, and we're going to hit many of those news elements over the course of this show. So I'm just going to say thank you for joining me, and I'm glad that you are here with me. If you find yourself coming back to this show often, and you find yourself under this voice often, a voice so subversive that the government literally took it off the air, then like the show. Give it a like. There we are. I'm sorry. Give it a like, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell. I tend to pop in here pretty often, all times of the day and night, because I don't sleep all that well. But if you find yourself come back here often, definitely subscribe to the channel. The objective is to get and max out, that sounds weird, but to get as many people to subscribe to this content. Ideally, because they like the content. I don't know why you subscribe to something you don't particularly like. But definitely subscribe to the content. If you find yourself coming back to the show often, you can always support it through PayPal, Patreon, or for that matter, Super Chats. All chats or stickers will be read, providing they're not racist, sexist, or bigoted. Also, I'm going to give a shout out to my members, the members of the Thomas family. And I say that to everybody that has joined. We have about 20 or so. That number is still going up, and I appreciate each and every one of you for all of the support you give to that channel, whether it's buying me coffee, whether it's a super chat, or for that matter, damn it, I should spill my coffee, or whether it's liking the video. All of those things are totally and entirely appreciated. So while I wait on my first guest, I want to show this. Now, I pointed out about the Romania. Yeah, so I pointed out about the protests that were taking place in Romania. Something else that's fascinating that's taking place are the sanctions that Joe Biden is launching against Russian energy. Now, let's be very clear. Those sanctions are not just against Russian energy. Those sanctions are about America. Those sanctions are hitting America. Now, the reason I say those sanctions are hitting America, because who do you think is going to pay for it? We are going to pay for it. We are going to be the ones that take the monetary hit for those sanctions. What's wild about it, I want to play this clip. This clip all right. So if you remember, we had a situation where Russia goes into Ukraine. Now, the Biden administration pushes Europe to pass sanctions, and those sanctions were going to hit the energy market. Now, weirdly enough, it seems that they expected Russia to give Europe energy for free, which I have no idea why they thought that. But Europe apparently didn't think about where are we going to get our energy from, considering that a large share of that energy came from Russia. All right. Now, the U.S. was able to replace those energy stores because we are a major energy producer at this point. Europe was not. So Europe took one step after the next that damaged its own energy infrastructure. And on top of damaging its own energy infrastructure, you can imagine that everything that goes along with that. How are companies going to get the energy they require to function? How are people going to get the energy they require to function? And in many of those respects, the energy that they ended up getting was from us at 5 times the cost. Now, just because they were getting it from us at 5 times the cost, that doesn't necessarily mean that our own energy expenses didn't go up. Now, the Biden administration recently has just taken the opportunity on his way out to pass sanctions that up to this point they would never pass. And they wouldn't push those sanctions through because they understood that it was going to hit Americans, and they didn't want a situation for inflation for Americans to go up during the course of a presidential election, or for that matter, up in a way where Americans or Joe Biden would get blamed for it. On his way out, however, no issue. And to make that point clear, in the very beginning When all of this took place, there was the question of, well, wait a minute. If you're going after the Russian energy market, aren't we going to also get hit with higher costs? Now, the answer to that was yes. Now, people may forget that. And I need to go to my guests, but people may forget that. But I do want to show this clip first. This is Jen Psaki when all of this first started. And the question was asked to Jen Psaki, are Americans going to have to pay more for energy costs? Now, you might have heard everything else after the fact. This goes back to the very beginning to just make this point that they knew it was going to hit Americans. And they did it anyway. This is Jen Psaki answering about energy costs for Americans.
Thanks, Jen. Following up on Weech's question, a lot of focus on the economic pain in Russia potentially from these sanctions. But what about the economic pain here? The Russians are saying they think gas prices in Europe are going to double. How high could they get here?
Well, I think, again, Peter, and as I said to Weija, I mean, some of this depends on what President Putin does. So as he is suggesting what the impact will be around the world, it's all based on what his actions are, just to be very clear about it. What the president is focused on and is working on is taking every step we can to communicate with, coordinate with, engage with big global suppliers around the world to minimize the impact on the energy markets.
But even without all this going on, gas in California is almost $5 a gallon. Should people across the country expect to see that kind of a number when they go to gas up their car? $5, $6?
Well, again, I think as you heard the president say last week, standing up for our values is not without cost.
There it is. There it is. Standing up for our values is not without cost. Oh, I love that line. I love that line. I want to bring in my guests. We're joined with Nebojša Malić. He's a Serbian-American journalist, blogger, and translator who wrote a regular column for antiwar.com from 2000 to 2015 and is now. Are you still a senior writer at RT, Nebojša?
Was.
No, the boy. Say it one more time. I'm sorry.
I was a senior writer at RT.
Was. Okay, fair enough. Was a senior writer. Man, thank you for joining me. I really do appreciate it. I've always liked your take on the issues associated with Europe. And there's right much now going on with Europe. So thank you. I appreciate it.
Sure. Happy to be on the show.
Thanks, man. I love that line by Jen Psaki. Our values are not without cost. We have to pay for our values. And the reason why I bring that clip up is because of what the U.S. and what Joe Biden has just done with these sanctions that they're applying to Russia right now. I didn't initially bring you on, but this was something that popped up in the media. Give me your take on that. I mean, this is something that, and by the way, not just the sanctions that Joe Biden passed, Ukraine deciding we're not going to now allow energy to go through our pipeline. So Europe, sucks for you. Give me your take on this. I'm fascinated by this, especially the hit that is going to take place to various countries in Europe now. What are your thoughts?
Well, it's easy for Jen to say this when she's not the one paying the price. Like this is supreme cynicism. She's got an MSNBC show now because even she couldn't handle the BS required to be the spokesperson for this outgoing administration. But yeah, I'm sorry, it's easy to talk about, values and cost when you're not the one bearing it, when that cost is getting basically put onto the people of California, North Carolina, Texas, Florida, New York City. It's the Americans paying the price for what exactly? What is the value in question that, we don't, we don't invade countries? But what was 1999 then? What was the NATO war against Serbia and the occupation of Kosovo? Well, that was different. No, it wasn't. No, it wasn't. And this talk about taking Greenland if need be by force, that's annexation. Okay, so much for moral superiority. This whole thing, as you mentioned, this whole, waiting to sanction oil up until the very last week of this whole charade of the Biden administration. And I mean, let's face it. They basically admitted that Joe Biden has been non-compos mentis for years and that it was never, ever lucid. And they covered up for him throughout these 4 years. So they've admitted that he was their puppet. So I'm not going to blame him for anything. The man doesn't know where he is or what he is anymore. But so whoever was running, JoeBiden.exe, decided to do this as the final screw you to the A, American people who voted for Trump, and B, Trump, and they're all of these legacy media outlets are going to say, oh well, this is all Trump's fault. The oil prices went up under Trump. Trump, orange man, bad, whatever. We've heard this a million times over the past 8 years. Nobody cares anymore. But they seem to be punishing their allies more so, even because, let's face it, as you mentioned, Biden tried to ban oil drilling in America. Fine, Trump is going to reverse that because that's executive orders. They can be countermanded.
Right.
But let's say that Americans are going to be fine with their oil and gas needs, for the sake of argument. But you've got these allies in Europe who are basically not sovereign countries. They're doing whatever the U.S. tells them to do.
Yep. And
they're the ones being screwed over because they can't import any more oil and gas from Russia. German industry, the economic engine of Europe, is basically shutting down, is dying a very slow, painful, poisoned death because they can't afford energy. Folks from the State Department and Treasury like to talk about molecules of freedom that are actual phrase for this liquefied American natural gas, but there's no infrastructure to export it, so it only whatever gets shipped off gets shipped, gets delivered at, as you said, 5 times the price. Well, I'm sorry, anybody who's run a small business, you don't need to be a small business owner to understand that when your input costs rise 5 times, your profit margin disappears.
Yeah.
So, and it's not a fact, it's not a factor of we're going to pay the CEOs less. It's a factor of we can't sell our product because it's too expensive for anybody to buy.
Yep.
And this is what's happening in Germany. You have centuries-old businesses shutting down because they can't afford the energy bills. Now, admittedly, it's not entirely the U.S. sanctions' fault. It's also the fault of the Germans being stupid and giving up nuclear power. But it's sort of a perfect storm of stupidity, malice, and incompetence that's hitting this. Now, the most recent sanctions actually targeted the Serbian oil and gas company that has nothing to do with Russia. Serbia is neutral. I lived in Belgrade for the past year. Serbia is neutral. It literally said, we don't want to be on anybody's side in this fight. For all of the American media saying traditional ally of Russia, no, there's no contract of alliance. Yes, we used to be allies in World War I and World War II. So were we with Americans. What's your point?
Right.
But, Serbia is basically saying we don't want to side with either Russia or Ukraine here. We're open to actually hosting peace talks. They just offered to host the peace talks between Trump and Putin. But Serbia is being targeted by these sanctions in the last week of the Biden stage show. Why? Because they can. Here we have the spectacle of some sort of deputy assistant undersecretary who's got 4 days worth of office budget he needs to blow, visiting Serbia and going, you must do this, you must do that. No, we must do nothing.
Yeah.
We're going to deal with the boss once he gets sworn in. Go away. But the government here is saying, oh no, we are so very small, we are so very weak, we must. No, why are you doing this? This is a hostile act. An economic blockade is an act of war. This is what people have seemed to have forgotten because nobody's dared oppose the United States ever since Serbia in the 1990s. But economic sanctions, the ones that haven't been voted by the UN, and even the UN ones are sketchy, that's an act of war. You're literally being targeted for economic warfare.
We've been doing it. We've been doing it unilaterally. I mean, it hasn't even been a situation where, like you said, this is not something that has been agreed upon. The U.S. just does it willy-nilly. And, just to make the point clear, the U.S. has decided to loot its allies, and to take a phrase from somebody. I mean, if you think about it, the amount of money that we've been putting out. So Trump comes in and says, hey, NATO, now we need you to give 5%. Okay, well, what is that 5% for? Well, it's for U.S. weapons. I mean, for all intents and purposes, the overwhelming majority of that money is just going to the U.S. to get weapons or whatever materials that they're going to get when they increase the budget to the 5%. The Ukraine war, where was most of that money going? Most of that money was coming to the U.S. for U.S. weaponry that we were going to, once again, supply to Ukraine. The increase in energy costs. Okay, again, if we're paying 5 times more, if Europe is paying 5 times more, who is it paying 5 times more to? Our energy companies. When those companies in Europe go belly up, what do they go? They come to the U.S. because our energy costs are cheaper. Like, all of this stuff is effectively taking money and draining it from Europe and putting it into the US, even when they blew up the pipeline. Again, who did that damage? That damaged Europe. And now Ukraine, who is effectively a vassal of the US, has made the decision entirely on its own, of course, to stop energy going into Europe through its own pipelines, which is going to damage various countries, Slovakia,
Right.
for example.
Well, I was
being
going to
one.
address that. So, yeah,
Yeah.
basically, you've got Slovakia and Hungary who are already skeptical towards this whole, unilateral, unconditional support for Ukraine business in Brussels anyway. And Brussels is trying to blackmail and pressure them on that account. And now you have Ukraine basically breaking these. It's interesting to point out, the West is supposed to hold contract sacred, right? It's all about property rights and contract law. And this is what, makes the West civilized and everybody else a savage, right? That's the doctrine that all of these good institutions people are putting out. Great. Who has been respecting all of their contracts for the past 3 years?
Russia.
Russia.
Yeah.
Who is it that has been breaking all of their contracts for the past 3 years and longer? Not Russia. Russia's enemies. Interesting to point out. That's one. Two, so the funniest thing here is that Ukraine is actually importing electricity from Hungary and Slovakia because a lot of their electric generation was destroyed by Russian airstrikes, which were reprisal for Ukrainian terror attacks. Essentially, if anybody remembers their World War II history, the Nazis were launched these rockets into England that had no military application whatsoever. They were just terrorizing British civilians as a way to, tell their public, oh, we're striking back at the British, whatever. But, V1, V2 rockets, they actually expended scarce resources that the Nazis couldn't spare, but Hitler was obsessed with them, so that's what they did. The Ukrainians are launching these drones against civilian buildings in Russian territory to say, oh, we're bombing Russia, we're striking back, whatever, and the Russians are responding by basically turning off the lights. And so now the Ukrainians have to import electricity from Hungary and Slovakia. And I'm actually kind of shocked that neither Orban nor Fico, the prime ministers of Hungary and Slovakia, haven't said, fine, you've shut off our gas, no more power for you. Because they'd be perfectly in the rights to do so.
Yeah, the way they threatened it, Fico has threatened it. I don't know if he's gone through with it.
I don't know if they've gone through with it either, but they've been talking about it for weeks and months because the Ukrainians were making threats and they haven't followed through. It's just one of those. It seems like the world is reverting to whatever you can get away with, you can do, which is not civilized, but I believe somebody wrote a book called Management of Savagery that seems to be perfectly descriptive about this. And I don't know, I doubt that the book was about this in particular, but it comes to mind unbidden because that's what we're dealing with. It's savagery. People are saying, well, the strong do what they will and the weak suffer what they must, which is fine if you believe yourself to be strong, as long as you are actually strong. But when you're not, it doesn't work out that way. And a lot of people are about to find out the hard way that they're not as strong as they thought. Because again, you mentioned GDP. How do you convert GDP that's based on financial services into artillery shells? You don't. You need industry. You need tangible products. You need, factories. You don't have factories. People who know how to make these things have either been forced into retirement because they're too old, too white, too male, too whatever, or there was a vax mandates and all of these other clever things. Let's bring in more. I don't know. The LA Fire Department type representation into this business. Well, who's going to make your shells?
Yeah.
This is, and of course Europe, being energy deprived, can't really produce things. And so now you've got a situation in which the Americans, let's face it, the US has a 5-sided hole in the budget. It's called defense spending. It's not defense spending, it's offensive spending. In every respect. And that is not 5% of GDP. That's something like 3.5. I think Poland spends more percentage-wise, but they don't have domestic military industry, so they have to buy everything from the outside. But nobody in the West can spend that much. Nobody. That 5% to ask from Trump is insane. And I think it's deliberately such that it can be that it's impossible, so people can't do it, so he has an excuse to do something else afterwards, whether take Greenland as payment or whatever. So it's a deliberately impossible ask. But even if they somehow could, it's not how much you spend, it's what you buy with your dollars. Because the
Yes.
Russians are spending, right now, they're spending 6.5, I believe Putin was saying. And they're getting Oreshniks and all these, sophisticated weapons that actually work on the battlefield. Whereas the Americans are spending $1 billion per F-35, which doesn't really work. So that's also got to factor it in.
I've said the same thing, that, it's the bang for the buck. It's return on investment that matters. Like, we use the $1 trillion a year as our military parades. It's our way of saying, look at how much we spend on our military. Don't screw with us. But it's what you get for that. Like, it has to actually match the battlefield that you're fighting on for it to matter. If you're spending $1 trillion and it doesn't match up to what you're spending it on. I mean, Kamala Harris spent $1.5 billion on a race and lost it to somebody who spent $300 million. So it's not just the money. I agree with you. It's what you're spending the money on. I am curious. I mean, and I'm sorry, I broke into I intruded upon your stream of thought, but you are right. We have a hole in our budget. Nobody ever analyzes the amount of money that we spend on our military in regards to what we're spending it on, the bang for the buck, whether it's indicative of the current battlefield that we're effectively fighting on. You're 1,000% correct. One of the things I want to hit is this notion of European, quote unquote, democracy. And the reason I'm putting it in quotes is because I have watched Georgia. Well, for one, I've watched Ukraine get taken down in a revolution in Maidan coup, where they literally overthrew the government, called it a revolution of dignity, and has ignored the fact that it was an actual coup. The democratically elected government of Yanukovych was effectively overthrown. Then I watched them do something similar in Georgia, where they did any and everything in their power with the French-born Georgian president working with the EU to destroy that government using a sort of Maidan tactic for it. And then I watched it again in Romania, where a court gets involved to strike down an election because they didn't necessarily elect the person who was going to win it, calling it Tik Tok videos by the Russians. Come to find out, it wasn't the Russians at all. It was their own government that had invested money into the electoral campaign. I want to get your take on this. So this is former European Commissioner Thierry Breton. And something that should be a mark of shame, he is effectively saying, hey, we have tools to deal with countries like Germany, because at this point, German government, the AfD, may actually take power in Germany as a direct result of the German government going in with European, let's say, orthodoxy, and just blowing off the best interests of the public for U.S. Security concerns. So this is theory. I want you to hear what he says, and I want to get your take on this.
Le poids de la parole, attendons ce qui va se passer, et pour l'instant, gardons notre sang-froid et faisons appliquer nos lois en...
Okay, he's speaking French. So this...
I actually watched that clip before, and I understand what he's saying. He says, but, my staff wrote this law. We have the law that enables us to do in Germany what we did in Romania. So, to protect our democracy, we're going to do to Germany what we did in Romania. I'm like,
thank you.
That's actually as close to a literal quote as I can get. But it's shocking. Like, this is the guy who actually resigned because von der Leyen didn't want to back him up when he went after Elon Musk.
And by the way, he's bragging about this.
Yeah, he's absolutely bragging. He's absolutely bragging.
Have the
and
law.
It's disgraceful. So his staff wrote it. So here's the thing. What happened in Ukraine in 2014, without going into too much detail, was the second color revolution in a decade. They had so the first color revolution of modern times was the first color revolution in let's say 21st century was in Serbia in 2000, in October 2000.
Yes.
And it was the general test for this what was going to happen afterwards. They ran that same script in Georgia in 2003, which is where Salome was she was the French ambassador to Georgia at the time, and the coup president gave her citizenship and appointed her foreign minister. That's how she got Georgian citizenship. She didn't speak the language or anything. And then it was tested again in 2004 in Kiev. The Guardian, of all places, has an article about how the U.S. has figured out how to win other people's elections and was bragging about what they did with the Orange Revolution in Kiev in 2004. They've tried it elsewhere, and the Arab Spring of 2011 was supposed to be the same thing, but it failed and it turned bloody, and because people had by that point figured out a lot of these tricks. They keep trying, and the US has this whole NGO industry that keeps trying, and the EU has a similar sort of overlay. But the idea is you basically hijack democracy. If you get a result you don't like in an election, you hijack democracy. You create a popular protest, or you hijack a justified popular protest, and you bring in your own people and you claim that's democracy.
Yep.
It's pernicious. It's democracy destroying. It's toxic. It's corrosive. Now, what happened in Georgia is that the ruling party won the election fair and square. All the observers said it was fair and square, and the president said, "No, I deny it. You cheated. What evidence do I have? Well, just a feeling that the Russians interfered. I don't have to prove anything. The Americans said it, so they didn't need any proof." She was literally invoking Russiagate to justify
Yes, she was.
it.
And by the way, she literally said that, just for the audience. He's not making it. She literally said, it's a feeling. She was like, I can't prove it. And she even says, the Americans, with all of the money that they have at their disposal, well, they couldn't prove it. So
they couldn't prove it, so that's good enough for them. And so she invoked Russiagate, which we all know is bogus. They admitted it was bogus. She obviously didn't get the memo, and then she tries to overthrow the government. Fails. The government, to their great credit, does not break up these protests by force. They very politely let these people scream into the void and then inaugurate the president normally and go about their business. And they respond to the EU by saying, "Fine, you don't want us, we don't want you either."
Yep.
Massive props to them, because that's dignity, that's sovereignty, that's the way to do this. And she goes and gets a job at the McCain Institute, thereby proving that she's been a stooge all along. Whatever. And then you have Romania, in which in the first round of the elections, the guy who wins the most votes, but not quite 51%, is this conservative independent candidate, let's say socially conservative for Romania, who's basically like, "No, I like Romania, I don't like war, we shouldn't be a puppet of Brussels, we should be a sovereign country." And the TikTok campaign promoting him was actually arranged by one of the establishment parties that failed to qualify in the first round. They thought too much of their own chances. And it's the same playbook as this New Knowledge campaign in 2017 in Alabama, which is a Democrat-funded shop that was smearing the Republican Senate candidate as being, backed by Russians, Russian bots or whatever. The Russian bots were theirs. They were the Russian bots. And then they went on to advise the Senate on Russian tactics, which I suppose they were uniquely qualified because they were the ones LARPing as Russians. Anyway, and this was a scandal even in the US. The New York Times thought of this as odious, and they had to shut down and rebrand and whatever. So this is happening in Romania, and then the Romanian Supreme Court basically says, "Oh, there was a Russian campaign on TikTok. We're canceling. We're not just we're annulling the election and canceling it." So that the president whose mandate has expired can continue being president. That's like, I don't know, the U.S. Supreme Court deciding that November 6th didn't happen because somebody said something on TikTok, and therefore Joe Biden is president for life.
It's astonishing. It really is astonishing. I've never seen anything like it.
And none of the people in the EU or the US who sort of made their political careers out of advocating for democracy promotion or protection or whatever, nobody has said a word. And in fact, as we just saw Thierry Breton saying, "Yeah, we did it and we'll do it again." I'm sorry, what? What legitimacy do you have?
He's bragging about it. Like, he is literally bragging about it. We have shut down an election because we didn't like the result. And if Germany, the beating heart of Europe, comes up with a result we don't like, we'll do it again.
But here's the thing. I don't think the AfD will win the election, even if they win the majority or the largest block of it, because Germany has a proportional system. This is how the European governments have been cheating their citizens for decades. They have this proportional system, and so it doesn't matter who wins the largest block of votes. If the two other parties put together 50% plus one, they get the prime minister. This is what happened in Poland. The old ruling party that I had issues with, but they were sovereignist and, skeptical of Brussels. They're also rapidly Russophobic. So, that policy continued no matter who's in charge. But the old Polish government was like, okay, fine, we got like 47%. We're still the largest bloc. We should form a government. But these two, little green fringe parties or whatever they were called. They're like, no, we don't feel like making a coalition with you. We're going to make a coalition with this, Brussels liberal Democrat, whatever. And they're going to have a government that's literally like 50% plus 0.1%, barest of bare majorities mathematically. And they're running as if the country as if they had absolute sovereign mandate.
Like a mandate, yeah.
In France, Macron literally manipulated last year's election, presidential one, because not presidential, sorry, the parliamentary. He called the snap election thinking that he's going to profit from it because he wanted to stop Marine Le Pen and her National Rally from getting the majority. And then when they got the majority in the first round, he's like, okay, he made a deal with this ultra leftist bloc. They call themselves the Popular Front. And I'm not just throwing labels around. They really consider themselves ultra leftist. Anyway, he made a deal with them. Okay, well, we're going to join forces with you to screw over Le Pen and the National Rally because they're Nazis or whatever.
Right.
And then we're going to rule, we're going to make a coalition afterwards. And then the moment that happened, he's like, oh, yeah, by the way, that deal we made, screw you. We're not putting you into government. I'm going to put in a minority prime minister who's going to be for my pocket party, and you guys can go F off.
It was like a mini coup, yeah.
Right. And so these people are obviously upset, and they've actually joined Marine Le Pen and the National Rally in early December to vote no confidence to the first government. And then Macron appointed another pocket prime minister. And so the National Front leader, Mélenchon, is like, you can keep putting in new prime ministers every 3 months. We're going to keep knocking them down. You're not going to outlast your mandate. You might as well resign. And Macron is saying, never.
Yeah.
That's democracy. Jefferson was right. Governments derive their legitimacy from the consent of the governed. European governments, first of all, are not sovereign because whatever they do, Brussels overrides them. And Brussels is ruled by unelected bureaucrats. Nobody voted for Ursula von der Leyen. Nobody. Secondly, the national governments that are determined to follow Brussels, they just completely ignore the will of their voters and cancel elections. Like what happened in Romania, like what, or make them meaningless, like what happened in France. I am convinced that this is going to happen in Germany because, the German government is so thoroughly cucked. They're just going to say, oh, these people are dangerous. If they win the elections, we're going to have to cancel the elections, or we're going to, set up another mathematical coalition.
How do they pull that off? I mean, like you must understand from the U.S. point of view, our elections are like sacrosanct. They're just, it's like a force of nature. They just are. It would be shocking for a court to come in and say, hey, by the way, that election doesn't exist now. I don't even know if we would have any precedent for it.
Well, we wouldn't, but that's because the United States, and this has been the most difficult thing to explain to people here in Europe, because everybody's like, oh, we have toilets that are older than our knowledge of the Americas. Technically true, but the American statehood, the American political system, the United States of America is older than most European modern states. Because a lot of, like the French, they have a constitution that goes back to the 1960s, I believe. Like they're on their fifth republic, and they've had a couple of empires. So France as a country has existed for longer, but the modern French government is relatively new. Britain has a system that goes way back. Fair. Germany was literally recreated by the Americans and the British and the French from the ashes of World War II.
Second World War. So
their system has all of these modern overrides. Romania, the Romanian constitution goes back to like 1991 because they were ruled by communists and they were a monarchy before that. So they're like their third or fifth form of government in the last 200 years.
Man, that's such a great point.
Yeah. So, Serbia, which is super traditional and everything, but our government basically dates back from 2000 to the color revolution. So again, for all of these, and you've got some legacy systems here and there, but in general, like I think the most recent Serbian constitution, and Serbia had like 10, the US has had 1.
Wow.
But Serbia's on its 10th constitution. It was passed in like 2009, I want to say, or 11. Like it's new, and it's longer than the Patriot Act because it's so chock full of frankly pointless details. But whatever. The point is that a lot of these European countries are relatively new political systems, and they've bureaucrats that run them, especially with the EU constitution, the Lisbon Agreement, or whatever they call it, is dates back to the early 2000s. And it can override stuff, and it keeps getting updated on the sly by unelected people.
Yeah.
To mean whatever they want it to mean. And we have laws written by this bureaucrat Breton and his crew that basically give them the power to do anything they want. And the worst part is you have no recourse. What are you going to do? Sue it to the Court of Human Rights? That can take years, and they always defer to the governments.
Well,
and
that's
you
what
can't rebel because there's no Second Amendment.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you about the Romania part. Like, they've been doing massive protests, trying to, as a recourse for it. Has the Supreme Court set a new date for the election? What is the current recourse going on in Romania for Carl Gorgatscu? I may be mispronouncing the last name, but it's something to the effect, Carl Gorgatscu. What is his recourse?
He's basically taken to, there was a massive rally in Bucharest yesterday. I think it was north of 150,000 people. Everybody's waving Romanian flags and chanting and generally being very positive and cheerful. And they were booing most of the mainstream media because they were accusing them of being fake news. And they were cheering for this one or two independent outlets that have been reporting fairly on this. But they basically are like, look, we had a revolution in '89 that overthrew the communist government. We can do this again if we're pressed. Don't usurp democracy. And so far, the government's like, yeah, screw you. We're just ignoring you. And most of the media in Europe, in the European Union, are like, yeah, no, nothing's happening.
This is outrageous.
Because it is.
I mean, like, this is like, I've never seen anything like this. Like, because from our point of view, Europe is supposed to be a representative democracy or constitutional democracy or parliamentary democracy, but the key word in there is representative of the public. And for the public to just get blown off, like, we're not going to accept this. Or in Georgia's case, we're not going to accept this. And we're going to get the entirety of the EU to put pressure to try to overthrow a government that we don't necessarily like. And again, for Ukraine, they did the same thing, though. This is a revolution of dignity. And as you point, I guess my point of view of it, where I started paying attention, it was when the Ukraine war took place. But you're right. It goes back to the color revolutions that were taking place prior, showing something similar. It's just shocking to me that
that's why I keep saying that color revolutions are not a clever trick. They're toxic for the very institution of democracy. Because if you can hijack, it's like a mind virus, and if you can hijack this mechanism that's supposed to be representative of popular will, that the government draws legitimacy from, you render that government illegitimate. And this is the biggest problem. So basically, that government has to rely on two things to maintain its legitimacy: brute force and lies, propaganda.
Yeah.
And those are not legitimate. From the Jeffersonian standpoint, speaking as an American citizen, that's not legitimate.
No, it's not.
And
that's
so, and all of these governments basically just manufacture consent because they don't actually have it. Lincoln said that the American Republic, I don't know whether he called it democracy. I think it was a bit of a dirty word back in those days, but he said it was a government of the people, for the people, by the people, which a lot of people now quote as gospel truth. And let's assume that's the definition. The European Union is a government of the bureaucrats, for the bureaucrats, by the bureaucrats. It has nothing to do with the people, nothing whatsoever. If the national governments that are actually theoretically elected make a mockery of elections by these post-electoral coalitions and manipulations and simply canceling elections when they got the result they don't like. And if the European central government in Brussels makes a mockery of national governments by saying, well, it doesn't matter what your people voted for, you're going to do what we tell you, that's not democracy.
No,
that is a structure of lies.
And it seems like they're using what they consider to be the orthodoxy of that, let's say, overarching bureaucratic system to affect directly the local governments, to give this kind of mockery of a democratic system.
Now the gloves are off, and basically they're switching from manufacturing consent through the media, which isn't working anymore, to simply affecting brute force, to using
the mask is off.
Yeah, if they had tanks to send to Romania, they would have, but they sent them all to Ukraine, so they can't.
For Germany, though, I mean, Germany, that's a pretty, like, Romania is more, from a standpoint of the national press, it's understated. Germany is not. Germany is the beating heart of Europe, as they call it. Are they really going to be able to, I don't know, whitewash an election if it does come across that the AfD is more popular? And the reason why I asked that, it seems to be when I was in, my ex is Austrian. She was from Austria. And you could see, I was there for the political election when they were doing the national elections. You could see a change in regards to the way that the Europeans are thinking about the war in Ukraine, for one, about their place in it, meaning they're sick and tired of putting all of this money and resources into the Ukraine project. And you can see it in Germany. I mean, the fact that Schultz is like, I want to talk to Putin, I want to talk to Putin. Okay, well, all of a sudden, do you want to talk to Putin? He can see it on the ground that the public is getting sick of the direction that Germany political wing is going. And so when you get this new, the AfD saying, we're sick of this, yeah, we want to turn back on Nord Stream, or being very loud saying, this war is not about Ukraine, this war is about the United States taking advantage of Europe. Okay, well, I suspect that the AfD is saying that because that is a popular opinion in Germany, and Schultz, who now has to backpedal on the stuff that he was going with before, either on immigration or for that matter on the war, knows it. So, like, it seems to be that that's not just Germany, that it seems to be Europe as a whole, meaning a wave going through Europe against many of the policies that the German government and many of the bureaucrats, as we call them, have been running with. So how on earth do you really think they're going to be able to overcome the will of what seems to be the Europe as a whole at this point, who seems to be trying to push in a different direction?
Well, I want to be optimistic about this, but unfortunately, I've watched the EU do this for years and decades, and the politicians in Brussels are absolutely insulated from any sort of accountability. Basically, it's the national governments that get beat up for bad policy, and Brussels who does whatever the hell it wants because it knows that they can privatize any sort of benefit and socialize any sort of pain. Kind of like that there's a price on our values, but somebody else gets to pay it. So the thing that they're doing to AfD is they're smearing them as Nazis because the Germans are, perhaps rightly so, conditioned to consider any sort of Nazi revival anathema because of what happened in World War II. And as
I accept that. I
mean, I have relatives who died in that war. We were under German occupation here in what used to be Yugoslavia. It was very brutal. We fought them. I mean, it was a very brutal war, and there's no sympathy here in my household for Nazism of any kind.
1,000% agree with you.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean that the German government is correct about smearing. It's one of those. I don't want anybody unjustly smeared as a Nazi because that robs that particular moniker of its power.
Yes.
This is the same German government that doesn't have a problem with Nazis so long as they're in Ukraine fighting Russia. So they don't have a problem with Nazis on principle. So they're calling AfD Nazis to trigger this, mental block in the German population. Oh, I can't vote for Nazis. Well, you're not voting for Nazis. You're voting for somebody who's opposed to this idiotic government's policy that's brought you nothing but ruin. Arguably, people shouldn't be using these nuclear political accusations inappropriately because if you overuse them, they lose their power. And once they do lose their power, chances are you might actually end up with actual Nazis, because we've seen, as per Ukraine, that they do exist. You might end up with actual Nazis coming back, and you can't stop them at that point because the magic word doesn't work anymore.
Or what these liberal governments are doing in regards to control. I mean,
but they're desperate. They're resorting to brute force and lies because that's all they have left. They can't promise anybody a better life or a better future because they've failed to deliver on it. And so their default, policy is basically shut up and do as we tell you because otherwise you're a bad person.
But see, that's the other irony of it. Do you remember the speech? I believe it was Rutt made, saying that the Europeans have to give up their living standards or European living standards. Effectively saying, in order to keep Europe this garden, we need to effectively pay more money for defense and give up on security benefits that we typically get for European. I mean, this stuff is outrageous. And so I agree with you. And using the Nazi thing, there's no room or coddling Nazis in this case. But the reason that people are moving to the AfD is not because they're Nazis. It's because they're their only outlet to stop liberal policy. I mean, it's kind of this liberal orthodoxy that many of the groups who are getting smeared as right-wing groups are just saying, look, we're looking out for the best interests of whatever this country is, whether it's Romania or Georgia, or pick any random country that you want to put in, Slovakia, where we want the best interests of us, not necessarily the best interests of this quote unquote European project that keeps involving us in wars. Like, that's the wild part about it. And it seems to be right-wing parties that seems to be focusing on this notion of what is in the best interest of whatever this particular country is, whether it's Romania first, or Slovakia first, or Croatia first, who just elected a right-wing guy who doesn't necessarily want to be involved in war. Do you, regardless of what the bureaucracy is doing in Europe, it still seems that they may be failing in their ultimate task of keeping this project going, especially with Donald Trump coming into office. How do you think Trump affects that? I mean, are they going to be able to continuously, have this kind of liberal orthodoxy overthrowing governments while
Well,
Trump is in office? If that makes sense.
Trump isn't necessarily going to support, block them from overthrowing governments, overthrowing a government of Romania or even Slovakia. He doesn't know FITO from a fiat.
The national governments, though, he complained about the fact that they were seemingly intruding upon the elections of national governments.
Well, he might stand up for Orban because Orban is a friend.
Yeah.
If they go after Orban, they might actually have to deal with Trump. But I don't think he's going to interfere too much in internal European, EU matters. Now, Moscow, on the other hand, is probably, and who knows? Maybe he's coordinating with Trump. Maybe Trump, doesn't think it's appropriate for a U.S. president to make these announcements, but it's perfectly appropriate for his first buddy, who happens to own the world's biggest megaphone, to say things that Trump can't say. Something.
Right.
I mean, that could be it. I don't know. I'm not part of the White House inner circle by any stretch of imagination. But I honestly, here's the paradoxical thing about the European project. All of these people in Brussels have this fantasy that they're building an independent economic, political, and even military bloc. They're not. The whole point of the globalist American empire is that to never allow an independent Europe of any kind. It has to be economically, politically, but most importantly, militarily enslaved to NATO and the United States in order for the globalist American empire to continue functioning. That's sort of an article of faith. Ask any sort of Beltway liberal, they will tell you this. So what's essentially this destruction of European economies is a plus for the globalist American empire.
Exactly.
Now, Trump is getting into office and he's notionally opposed to this. And his whole talk about Greenland and Canada and Panama Canal and all of this stuff is essentially a nationalist empire, that doesn't really care about these European vassals. It's going to extract from them whatever it can, but is not going to, fall for our sacred democracy, blah, blah, blah principles. He says, you have resources, I want them.
Right.
Mine. And that itself is going to undermine this globalist project. But he's not going to go into Europe overthrowing governments. Maybe he should, but he's not going to do that because that's not, he's focusing on snatching resources for American control, which is an implicit admission that the globalist project has failed and that the globe divided into combatant commands of the U.S. military is no more. But again, that's a different topic for a different time.
No, that's a fascinating point.
Yeah, but I wish at this point, I really wish somebody would kick the European Union around the way it's used to kicking other people, just to give them a taste of their own medicine.
He is. He's effectively.
Show them how it. Yeah.
Well, he's effectively trying to take down Greenland. And, Greenland has come back saying we want our independence. We don't necessarily want to be Americans, but we do want our independence. And, of course, what Trump wants, I agree with you entirely, a larger America. I think he looks out at the world. He sees China and Russia, how dominant they are, one in technology, the other one in industry. And he's insecure, and he's looking for a way to deal with that insecurity, this kind of fortress America, with this idea that Greenland...
But that means throwing Europe overboard. That means throwing the EU under the bus, getting rid of it as ballast. And so all of a sudden, ironically, this may give the European bureaucrats what they've always wanted, but it would also make them actually responsible for their actions, which is something they hate as much as a vampire would hate a cross or a string of garlic. So it's going to put them. They're going to get their what they wanted, and they're going to get it good and hard, and they're going to find out that that's not what they wanted at all.
But I didn't get the sense that they wanted America to pull away from Europe, meaning that
They
was
didn't.
always the country, the
Well,
thing with
they've
Trump.
always they've always wanted the political and economic power, but have America be responsible for their military security. That's sort of the deal that was made after World War II. The American troops are going to stay in Germany and basically, ensure that no communist government is elected anywhere. And in
Mhm.
return, the Europeans can, provide America with luxury goods and create fancy welfare states for their own people and show off as better than communism. That was the whole social contract during the Cold War. Well, the problem with these, generous welfare states is that they've attracted mass migration, which is causing all sorts of problems, and it, has basically destroyed domestic societies. And all of a sudden, now they're trying to get mobilized for a massive military campaign of industrial warfare, which they're not prepared for. And even if they were, their industry has just withered on the vine because of the American sanctions against
Yeah.
Russian energy that they desperately needed. And so the social contract has been violated, and nothing better has come in to fill the void yet. And I think the Brussels bureaucrats are desperately trying to tread water and ensure that through inertia, the pretense of the old order is maintained, because they're deathly afraid of what might come next.
But they don't recognize what is happening to them. I mean, like,
No.
they're obviously, like, the amount of money they're putting out for either military, meaning with Ukraine coming into the US, for oil and gas that's coming into the US, like, that is a massive drain on resources, not to mention the wars where all of this mass migration from, let's say, like Syria, for example, ends up going into Europe, destabilizing the politics. But they don't see it at all.
No, because they're divorced. They're so remote from it. As I mentioned, the Brussels bureaucrats most of them are unelected, and so they're so far removed from the consequences of their own actions that they think nothing of it. Somebody else pays the price for their values, as Saki put it. And so, it's just one of those. You can have, and because their delusions are they're drinking from their own supply of Kool-Aid manufactured by the media, because they have the censorship regime that Breton is boasting about. They don't even know what the situation is on the ground. And if somebody dares tell them that, somebody gets punished, censored, run out of town, because how dare you mention this? Censor, censor, censor. You had 150 bureaucrats listening in on the call that Elon had with Alice Weidel of AFD, because we must make sure that she doesn't say something we disapprove of. That's not liberty. That's not democracy. That's not freedom of anything. That's a dictatorship. You guys are running a dictatorship straight out of Orwell. What is wrong with you?
Yeah, it's
But
bizarre.
again, it doesn't register with them.
That's bizarre. Neb, man, thank you for this. Great segment. I got to have you back, man. Nebojša Mališ, he's a Serbian-American journalist, blogger, and translator who wrote a regular column for antiwar.com from 2000 to 2015. Neb, thank you for this, man.
Thanks
Great
for having
job.
me.
You have a good one. All right. I want to go to my next guest. We are joined with the one and only a good friend of this show, Arnav Devile. He is an international lawyer specializing in international criminal law and participated in the defense of former President Saddam Hussein, along with former U.S. Attorney General Ramsey Clark. In the wake of the Caesar Act, he documented the illegal sanction regime imposed on Syria while living in Damascus. He is author of the book Foreign Entanglements, Biden, Ukraine, and the Fracturing of the U.S., or I should say the American political consensus. Arno, welcome to the show, man. How you doing this morning? You doing all right?
I'm fine, Jamal. Thank you for having me, and Happy New Year to yourself, your family, and all the listeners.
Oh, man, thank you. I appreciate it. Happy New Year's back at you. I had to bring you on. Recently, Joe Biden, on his way out, passed what I call the nuclear option of sanctions. And this was some sanctions that he didn't necessarily, I can't get it out. These were sanctions that he didn't pass over the course of his administration. If you remember, many of the sanctions that Joe Biden was talking about that were going after energy was understood was going to hit Europe. But for the most part, the U.S. was going to be safely away from them. Now, I played a clip earlier today with Jen Psaki, and I'll play that clip once again just for the public, just so you know I'm not making this up, where when asked about it directly, Psaki points out, hey, we have to pay for our values. That, yes, we're passing these sanctions, and yes, it's going to have an impact on America, but hey, as the president said, we have to pay for our values. Now, this was back then for the sanctions that they passed that were minor in regards to how they were going to hit Americans, even though it did increase inflation. I'm just playing this because I want to give context to what Joe Biden is doing now.
Thanks, Jen. Following up on Weech's question,
Yeah.
a lot of focus on the economic pain Russia potentially from these sanctions. But what about the economic pain here? The Russians are saying they think gas prices in Europe are going to double. How high could they get here?
Well, I think again, Peter, and as I said to Weija, some of this depends on what President Putin does. So as he's suggesting what the impact will be around the world, it's all based on what his actions are, just to be very clear about it. What the president is focused on and is working on is taking every step we can to communicate with, coordinate with, engage with big global suppliers around the world to minimize the impact on the energy markets.
But even without all this going on, gas in California is almost $5 a gallon. Should people across the country expect to see that kind of a number when they go to gas up their car? $5, $6?
Well, again, I think as you heard the president say last week, standing up for our values is not without cost.
Right there, standing up for our values is not without cost. Got to pay for our values. Got to pay for our values. All right. So now, on his way out, Joe Biden passed sanctions that he knows is going to directly impact that cost. And he's doing so on his way out because he wants the cost to be stuck with Trump. So when Americans are going to pay for more in groceries, when Americans are paying more at the fuel pump, that they think Trump, despite the fact that these are sanctions that Joe Biden is passing themselves. Give the audience an explanation of these sanctions. He's going not just after certain companies, he's also going after ships, like 180 different ships or something like that the Russians are supposed to use to get gas from point A to point B. What's going on, Arno?
Yes, well, as far as the ships are concerned, I think it's referred as the ghost fleet, something like
Shadow.
this.
Yeah.
The shadow fleet. Yeah.
Shadow fleet.
So I mean, it's more of the same with that gang, and honestly, I'm not a pro-Trump, but with like what 7 days, 8 days to go now, we can't wait, to see them out because it's just it's par for the course with this kind of off-world ideological slant on everything that this administration's been doing.
Yeah.
And to the extent they've made mistakes upon mistakes, predicated upon, I would say, erroneous perception of reality. We used to say something about back in the days, the people who think of themselves as somehow imbued with a manifest destiny, as opposed to those people, politicians, as it were, statesmen for some of them, who, as we say, they're known because they are counting. They do the math.
Mm-hmm.
So sooner or later, those people who conduct policy predicated on this notion of exceptionalism tend to put themselves at the center of the perfect storm because they manage to rally everybody and their mother against them, essentially, in this kind of double down approach to everything under the sun. Whereas the other more grounded politicians and or statesmen, as it were, tend to evaluate the cost. It's a risk cost analysis, and you have to look at the numbers. If you're in a war, you have to look how many troops you got, how many divisions, like Stalin used to say about the Vatican. How many divisions,
Mm-hmm.
And so this is what we're seeing with this administration one more time. This kind of lashing at the incoming administration, trying to. I wouldn't even say that it's predicated on trying to hand over the situation so as to politically use it and blame him I think in America, at the very least, no one is deluded about this. It's all squarely falling on the Biden administration from top to bottom. And the thing is, those people actually have their counterpart in Europe, believe it or not. People like former French finance minister Bruno Le Maire, for instance, at the onset of the special military operation, went out and said they were going to bring the Russian economy on its knees, and doubled down about this. And when he was confronted times and time over about the fact that not only the Russian economy was absorbing the blow, but was actually doing pretty well and benefiting from that trend of sanctions, he was trying to dismiss it as, some kind of pro-Russian talk, pep talk. So with those people, and it's the same thing with former EU Commissioner Thierry Breton. Those people are they've created for themselves this kind of condominium with semantics to boot. They only hang around with themselves. They are completely ideologically forged in their worldview. And to the extent their policy never quite gets them what they want, they either blame other people's perception, or they outright peg you as Putin and or Russian agent, as it were. I mean, I don't know.
Well, they do. If you
So
think of Georgia, for example, as I was talking about Ned, speaking about it with Ned, they would say that a person who doesn't want to go to war is Putin's, like they would say, he's Russian backed or Russia leaning, as opposed to the person just pro-Georgian, or the person is a Georgian nationalist or Romanian
that's it.
nationalist. It's so bizarre, the language that they've used, that they've agreed upon in order to attack their political opposition.
Yeah, it's a very binary view of the world.
Yeah.
It's either or, which
Mhm.
actually reminds us, what George W. Bush used to say, at the onset of the war on terror. You're
Yes,
either
sir.
with us or with the terrorist.
Yep.
But look at the situation now. I mean, we've known it obviously since 2012, and the Jack Sullivan memo to Hillary Clinton, and herself saying even, that in Syria, for instance, we are on the side of Al Qaeda, or Al Qaeda is on our side. But essentially, those people, they don't allow reality to ruin their party. They have that script, and they go with it. And whether you're talking about some of those operating political operatives in DC, or some of their satraps in Romania, for instance, or Georgia, they all have adopted the same talking points. It's quite fascinating to observe.
It is bizarre. It is very
Yeah,
bizarre.
and,
I've
and
never
then they
seen
all
anything.
congregate at the Atlantic Council, at the this NATO junket, once a year in Munich, the
Mhm.
conference on security in Munich, and they're all exchanging slaps on the back, and everything is copacetic, and
But
but
they have to
obviously,
see that that's not working. I mean, like they have to see that that's falling apart. For example, just if you look at France or Germany, for example, and the political machinations that they had to go through, that Macron had to go through, for example, in order to keep either the left wing government or Le Pen's party from out of power. I mean, he is effectively politically neutered in France. If you look at Germany with the AFD, well, given a fair shot, the AFD may actually win that race, even though they may have to go through some kind of political machinations in order to keep them out of power. And again, Slovakia, Hungary, but Croatia is a new one that has just won, where the right wing wins in that election. It seems that they're losing their grip. Or am I misunderstanding what I'm watching?
no, they are losing their grips, but they've got so many steps ahead of us that they've put into places. I mean, they control the media, they control the justice system, and all the way to the constitutional court level.
Yeah.
They control the narrative, and to the extent every EU member state has surrendered its sovereignty to the EU Commission, they have no way to, I would say, influence policy.
Mhm.
Because if you want to be in the system, if you want to be, getting the advantages that come with it and the perks, and let's make no mistake about it, a lot of politicians are in it mainly for the perks. you've gotta be briefed as to what you can promote and what you should not promote. And I think the AfD and Thierry Breton was actually invited to talk about the situation in the upcoming elections in Germany. And the question was asked to him whether or not he was concerned about the fact that AfD might not take the chancellorship, but at least be a force to be reckoned with in the Bundestag. And he essentially said, well, we will do what we need to do to preserve democracy.
Right.
So
So this
they're
guy,
flipping the whole thing over. This is crazy,
I'm so glad you mentioned that because basically the mask is off. That's what we're coming down to. And
Exactly.
the thing with Brenton is astonishing to me because he was effectively bragging about this. This is former European
That's
Commissioner
it.
Thierry Brenton, and
He's the guy behind the DSA, by the way, the Digital Service Act, which is this
I'm
kind
not
of
surprised.
censorship. Yes.
I'm so not surprised.
He got into a major spat with Elon Musk, and Elon Musk essentially told him to go walk the dog, if you know what I mean.
Well, because
And he was
he is arguing here effectively. He says, "Look, the same thing that we did in Romania, we have the tools in order
we have to do it.
Yeah, we have the
It
tools
comes
to be able to stop it in Germany."
exactly.
And it's
If
like we
push
can
comes to
preserve
shove.
democracy by destroying democracy. Like, I mean, just outrageous. Like, and he's bragging. And I guess my thing is, imagine like your frame of mind where you feel so thoroughly comfortable to effectively say we can overturn democracy in Germany if we need to in order to preserve democracy. It's like, what? Said it again? We can preserve democracy in Germany by overthrowing democracy? Yes, that's exactly what I just said. It's astonishing. And he's, like I say, he's bragging about it. Oh, we're not worried about the AfD winning because we can do the same thing to Germany that we did in Romania.
Well, you have to understand at the same time the
Great.
sociological aspect of those people. I mean, they were recruited, trained, bred into that system. They were the one who, back in the 1990s, even 80s, were advocating for the EU construction because EU was peace and nationalism was war. And now we're seeing, 35, 40 years later, the exact opposite. I mean, the EU advocates for war and more war, despite a complete military defeat there. I mean,
With the
they have
nationalistic governments being the ones who want to stop the wars, weirdly
who
enough.
want to start the war and do
Yeah.
trade. Yes. So
Just bizarre. Utterly
So
bizarre. I mean,
they just can't, this would be tantamount for them to come out and basically said, I was wrong all my life. Essentially, I bet on the wrong horse and I've got egg on my face. They'll never do that. They'll have to be kicked out. They won't do it. They won't have this kind of serendipity moment and come out clean and say, sorry guys, sorry for all the troubles.
no,
I made a
because they think they're
huge
right.
mistake. They will never do it. They will
They
never do
think
it.
they're right. They think they're more moral. They think they're more ethical. They think they're just inherently more right. When I was in Europe and you would talk to some of the people who were voting for the liberal parties, they would say, well, those right wingers are just incompetent, they're stupid, they're racist. They say very similar things that they do in the United States for people who are Democrats. It is amazing to me. They don't see outside of that bubble. And because they don't see, and all of us are in a bubble to some degree, but they come across as somewhat cultish. And it's almost like they look at themselves in the morning with a sense of pride and respect that I have no idea where they get it from. And yet that's where they function. From your
The chosen
point
ones.
well, I mean, but certainly the losing in Ukraine is going to have an effect. And also you can see it in, like, for example, Schultz right now is like pushing on this notion of having a talk with Putin, between Trump and Putin. And you can see it in the way that the German political party, the AfD, has been very outspoken of, yes, we want to reactivate Nord Stream. And no, we don't want to be a part of this war. Or the liberal parties that are in France that are saying something similar, meaning there is a political aspect of Europe. I would even say there might even be the majority that is sick of the war, that wants it to stop, that don't want to take on this kind of pain and suffering that they're going to have to deal with, paying 5 times more for energy from the United States, or for that matter, paying all of this money for weapons. They want to get back to this idea of we want to be our liberal democracies where we get our health care and we get our free education. That's what we want to do. So do you see losing in Ukraine, do you see Trump coming in with this idea of pulling away from this kind of European project? Do you see Europe getting back to that, or no change in Europe? They're still going along with von der Leyen and the like, pushing for whatever particular European policy in alignment with the United States. What are your thoughts?
Well, the problem is we've just had European elections last June, so that
Yes.
train has left the station. To the extent we could expect some of those people at the top of the EU pyramid to come, to 180 degrees,
Not so
as
much.
opposed to
Yeah.
360, like Baerbock used to say. He's fond of saying, what is the institutional mechanism to replace those people? Unfortunately, they're here to stay for the next 6 years.
Wow.
So I think the calculus in their mind is they're going to try to work with their counterpart across the pond, which there are many left, believe me. If not, they are the overwhelming majority in the institutional levers and the lobbying groups and the globalist organizations. They're going to try to wait out the Trump mandate, and they're going to basically take a leaf from the old playbook and try to mar his term as much as possible, blame him for everything, and make sure that they don't really get their agenda pushed aside too much, so that when the time comes, and it will come, they will regroup. They will try to think something again through to prevent, eventually JD Vance, to the extent we are, being presented with JD Vance as a possible continuation of a nationalistic, home-centric approach to American policy.
Mhm.
They will try to pull a fast one on him. But now, you really have a dichotomy in the US, and it's really fascinating to see, because Europe politically is irrelevant right now. Let's be honest.
It is.
The center of gravity of the Western world, politically speaking, more than ever before, is in Washington, D.C. And it's interesting because whereas in 2016, Trump somewhat acted in isolation, he was this kind of maverick, this kind of unidentified object. There we are now, 8 years later. He actually, there are billionaires with him, people
Mhm.
from the power structure. We have some those kind of also confessions, or this kind of owning up to their mistakes, or blaming the Biden administration. I'm talking about Zuckerberg, for instance, who goes to Mar-a-Lago as he goes to Canosa and try to make amend and be on the winning team. So it's very interesting to see this realignment, and but make no mistake, it's all about trying to preserve American hegemony, at all
Mhm.
cost, including European, because we can see that Europe is basically being thrown under the bus. But the idea again is, those people are thinking long term, decades, and this whole green ecology, green economy, whatever they want to call it, this whole scam predicated on flawed numbers, which call for creating a whole new tax condominium, because you want to get people. You were talking about, people want to get their health care, they want to get their centralized nanny state back. They want that. This is over. This was decided back in 1973. I would say even 1957.
Mhm.
At the Club of Rome, the idea was, to preserve the semblance of a welfare system for as long as communism was an ideological alternative. To the extent communism collapsed in 1990,
Oh, I see.
there was no need left. Now the real cynical, powers that be in the West, the money interest, didn't care much about the United States. It was all about, promoting free trade agreements that make no sense on the environment to begin with, which really goes to show you that the environment as a cause is a way for former Trotskyites to recycle themselves. We used to say green on the outside and red on the inside, like a watermelon. But it's a way for them to get a seat at the table of the new neoliberal order, keeping in mind that the idea in fine is to racket the middle class. You have to destroy the middle class. What JFK used to call the Great Society. You have to destroy that. You have to create this environment where man is a wolf for man, everyone against everyone, and we see it in the policies carried out in West Asia, because it's not about nation building. It's about destroying nations and egging on factions depending on any given interest on any given day, favoring one faction over another and doing the exact opposite, the next day, but keeping them weak, chronically weak all the time, and at each other's throat, so as to preserve imperial power in the region. Well, this policy has come home now to roost. I mean, I think somebody wrote a trilogy back in the early 2000s. I forgot his name. It's called Sorrows of Empire. The Blowback was the first book, and
Chalmers
and
Johnson.
Nemesis. Yes,
Chalmers Johnson.
he basically, yeah, Chalmers Johnson. That's right, and
Those books are
it's all
fantastic.
there.
Yeah.
I can't recommend people to, enough for people to go read those 3 books, because it's really all there.
And by
But
the way,
now
you can
we're in the
listen to speeches.
Nemesis.
You can listen to speeches also, by the way. I mean,
Yeah,
he
yeah.
a fantastic speaker and writer. And you're absolutely right. Like in Blowback, he was talking about how when 9/11 hit, we had no idea who did it because we had invaded and knocked over so many governments. We had pissed off so many people around the world. And yeah, when you get to Nemesis, I forget, there was another one that he wrote. All of those books were fantastic. And yeah, it's coming home to roost in Europe in this kind of
In
strange,
America,
but
I
in
would
Europe
say, in
also.
America as well. Oh, yeah, of course, the
Well,
whole West. Yes.
yeah. I mean, but we have taken, it's almost like we've decided to loot Europe. Like, for example, the 5% for military spending. We don't even spend 5%. We spend $1 trillion a year on our military, and we don't even spend 5% of our budget on the military. And Trump is like, yeah, now we need you to go from 2% to 5% when they weren't even paying the 2% prior. Why do you think he's doing this? Is this a way to effectively pull the U.S. from NATO and the responsibilities of NATO that the U.S. primarily pays for?
Well, some would say that this is what it's all about, trying to get to understand that NATO is a losing proposition, but there are very deeply entrenched interests within NATO. NATO has been in place since 1949. Careers have been built over, decades, and there's a whole culture that's been developed through NATO, and
Right.
NATO is a convenient tool to pry over, recalcitrant regions like East Asia. Which has where NATO already has entered into condominiums with other countries, local countries there. So NATO, there are a lot of people who are going to defend NATO tooth and nails. Make no mistake about it. It's just that Trump is thinking he has a 4-year term, right? We're not dealing with someone who has 25 years to put in place his vision. So he has to provide enough to everybody who's been somewhat coalescing around him, so that everybody leaves the room happy and satiated. And in the sense of the NATO rhetoric, he approaches the whole concept as a businessman would, saying, I'm not getting anything back as far as what I'm paying for. And so, to the extent we are the top net contributor to NATO, we believe, since we are providing security for Europe, which is a croak, because France has a nuclear weapon. They don't need American security. But that's the message. We protect liberty, and Europe is our précaré, is our Monroe Doctrine. Somehow on the east, and it's our preserve. And so we need to expect our partners to pull their weight. But by doing so, he also ensures that with the added military budgets adopted in European countries, that money is used to buy, make no mistake about it, American equipment.
That's right. That's
So
right.
there's no European industry of defense. There was a nascent one, but it was still in the egg. When the Poles get, their financial dividends from Brussels, the part of it that's allocated to defense needs, they're buying the F-35. They're not buying the Eurofighter
Right.
or any other alternate Tornado plane, which is pretty good plane, Tornado. No, they buy this big bloated F-35, which we know is a flying coffin. It's
But
too
they
many
don't know that.
electronics
Like,
on board.
but see, that's the part about Europe that always gets me. Like, they don't get that. They don't get that when they're like when Donald Trump. It puts you in the mind of mob, like Tony Soprano. It's like, hey, that's a nice restaurant you got there. It'd be a shame if anything happened to it. And then you come back next year and says, hey, by the way, the security fee has gone up to 10%. And it's like, what do you mean it's gone up to 10%? And what are you protecting me from anyway? It becomes
From yourself.
um, but they don't seem to come to that conclusion. They just, I mean, because what Trump is going to do, even if he doesn't get them to pay 5%, he may be doing this just to get them to pay their 2%. But he wants the money. And as you point out, the money is coming for all intents and
It's
purposes.
coming home. That's right.
Yeah. It's just so wild to me. And they do it. They go along with it every year.
It's a shakedown. The whole thing is a shakedown.
Yeah.
That's the dawn. Orange man.
It's astonishing. I got it before I let you go. We have about 2 minutes. Do you think the sanctions, to go back to the beginning, do you think the sanctions that Joe Biden is putting out, that they're going to have any kind of real effect on anything? I mean, oil and gas prices have gone up. I think we're at 81 a barrel or something to that effect. They haven't kicked off significantly yet. But do you think that that's going to have any kind of real world effect on Russia, or for that matter, the energy markets?
Well, it won't have any effect on Russia, to be sure, because Russia has, for quite some while now, found alternative trading routes and new customers. And China needs energy resources very hungrily. India as well. India accounts for, I think, 35% of sales, Russian sales of energy. And in fine, Europe, because Europe buys Russian oil from paying extra because you have to pay the middleman, which is India. So that's not going to upset the Russian economy. I think it's mostly a political ploy trying to tie the ends of the incoming Trump administration, keeping in mind that there's going to have to be elections held in Ukraine before there's any kind of I would say formal arrangement, to the extent they have a meeting of the minds on what they understand what Russia wants, and that this leads to some kind of a winding down of the hostilities and some kind of a rebooting of European architecture security.
Yeah,
because this is what it's all about, really. But we're not talking about at least 6 months. So the idea is that for at least the next 6 months, going to summer, things are going to remain the same, and the sanctions are legal. I mean, I don't think. I guess the Trump administration could somehow show good faith by lifting some of the sanctions, but politically it would be difficult to go full out and unravel. I mean, keep in mind there's 30,000 sanctions against Russia. It's crazy. It's insane.
They've been doing sanctions going all the way back for like 20 years, if not longer, just sanction after sanction after sanction.
Yes.
I have to let you go, but one question: will Zelensky win the election if they have it in Ukraine? Meaning, will any kind of negotiation, the person who's handling those negotiations, will that be Zelensky? Does Zelensky have what it takes to win an election in Ukraine if it was held today?
No, right now he's polling at 11% in Ukraine.
Wow.
Yeah. No, right now, I mean, I'm going to make a bet here. I think we're going to be looking at the establishment candidate, which is Zaluzhny, former Supreme Commander of Ukrainian forces, now serving as Ukrainian ambassador to the UK. That's the imperial candidate. And we may see him facing Arestovich, who's now doing, funnily enough, he's doing I think he was on Joe Rogan.
He's made a 180. He
was on Patrick Ben David. Patrick Ben David, yes. So he's doing a lot of American podcasts, yes. And I think that's what we'll have essentially a Biden candidate and a Trump candidate. This is basically what we'll have, because they need someone to play ball, and Zelensky is too compromised by his never say die approach. I mean, even a couple of days ago, again, he says some crazy stuff. I mean, things that make no sense. Oliver Stone underlined it also all the time. This guy is off his knockers. So they will retire him. They will retire him slowly but surely. He's made his loot, and they will. Yes, but he's politically, the guy is posterized.
Well, we'll see what happens. I agree with you. Arestowitz has come back and he's been, very critical of the Zelensky government, to put it mildly. And as you point out, Zelensky, they kicked him out of Ukraine because Zelensky was concerned about him being a political rival. But they're saying elections, and they're saying elections are going to take place this year, first part of the year. So we'll see. You might be absolutely right. Arnaud Devillet, he is an international lawyer specializing in international and criminal law, participated in the defense of former President Saddam Hussein along with U.S. Attorney General Ramsey Clark. In the wake of the Caesar Act, he documented the illegal sanction regime imposed on Syria while living in Damascus. He is the author of Foreign Entanglements, Biden, Ukraine, and the Fracturing of the American Political Consensus. Arno, man, thank you for this. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamal. Always a pleasure.
Always, man. I really appreciate it. Thank you. All right. I want to go to another really good friend of this show. He's been a friend of this show and my previous iterations, the one and only Ted Raw. Ted Raw is political cartoonist, syndicated columnist, host of TMI from 10 to 12 every day, Monday through Friday, with the one and only, the great Manila Chan. What's happening, Ted? How you doing this morning, man? You doing all right? Oh, I can't hear you, Ted. Your mic might be muted. Still can't hear you, Ted. I can see you. I just can't hear you. That happens sometimes. I'm not, but so Ted can definitely hear me. He is coming up. He would be there in a moment. I'm going to give him some time to work that out. Look, if you dig the content, you find yourself coming back to the show often, definitely give it a like, share it, subscribe to it, hit the notification bell. Also, if you really find yourself digging this content, you can support this work through PayPal, Patreon, or for that matter, Super Chats. All chats will be read, provided they're not racist, sexist, or for that matter, bigoted. I also want to thank all of you that have decided to join the Thomas family and become members of this show. Welcome back, Ted.
Okay, do you hear me
There
now?
you are.
Okay, great.
How you doing, man? You doing all right this morning?
Yeah, I'm ready to face the week. How about you?
Yeah, I guess I am. I mean, I don't have a choice one way or the other. Time just kind of drags me along, whether I want to stop the train or not. One of the things that is coming up is apparently TikTok ban. TikTok has said it would cease all operations starting January 19th if the Supreme Court goes through with the ban. And considering what happened to us, I feel some kind of way for TikTok on this. I mean, keep in mind, we have a First Amendment in this country. At the very least, we're supposed to. And they are using this argument about TikTok saying that Chinese are apparently getting their hands off of our top secret information for those people doing cat videos, and that in and of itself is enough of a reason to stop it. Whereas the real reason has more to do with the fact that TikTok has been instrumental in giving, let's say, a context to what is happening in Israel with the war, meaning people are seeing for themselves all of these people being killed, shot, kids being shot or frozen to death. And many of these videos are coming out from Israeli soldiers themselves. Mm-hmm. And you don't take my word for it. This is Mitt Romney. And he's having a conversation with, what is the sociopath's name? Oh God, what is the sociopath's name? It'll come to me in a moment. But Secretary of State, Blinken. Mm-hmm. And listen to what he says, because this is the honest part, that effectively social media has become our commons. And because it's now our commons, much of the media information that we get is coming from social media.
Some wonder why there was such overwhelming support for us to shut down potentially TikTok or other entities of that nature. If you look at the postings on TikTok and the number of mentions of Palestinians relative to other social media sites, it's overwhelmingly so among TikTok broadcasts. So I'd note that's of real interest, and the president will get the chance to make action in that regard.
Republican Senator
Romney saying the quiet part out loud. that effectively, look, when we were looking at, there was a social media campaign against going basically against Israel. And it wasn't like a campaign per se. It was just that Israeli soldiers were showing stuff online, or you could see videos of people being killed, shot, kids, and everything else. And people, as Americans, you're going to feel some kind of way about it, regardless of your take on the war. And so his point is there was a large number of Americans who could watch that, took issue with that. And because we are so bought and corrupt that AIPAC or some of these other groups that are effectively pushing for Israeli rights over American best interests, these groups were dumping over $100 million into a political race on anybody who's going to be against this issue of Palestine and Israel. I'm sorry about the noise in the background. It's disturbing myself also. The quiet part out loud is that there was political pressure for them to do something about TikTok, or for that matter, Twitter. Well, Twitter is under the auspices of Donald Trump's best friend. So no, on that one, TikTok, however, is fair game. And they wanted the ability to be able to control what Americans see on these various social media platforms, especially on the issue of Gaza and Israel. And so a lot of the energy that they were getting from the political space came against TikTok because TikTok was willing to allow people to see what was taking place actually on the ground. And those people were coming away with a certain assessment of what was happening on the ground, that this is a genocide, and typically we're supposed to be against genocide. It's astonishing to me that they're about to ban the largest social media network in the world, in the US, because of what it's showing on the network, using this dodgy excuse of we don't want the Chinese to get the names of people putting out cat videos. Give me your take on this, Ted.
Well, yeah, I mean, whether it's because of the Palestinian thing, which I suspect is a big part of it, or not, it doesn't matter. I mean, the issue is in our system and in our culture, we are innocent until proven guilty. And forget about proof. There's no evidence that TikTok is guilty of anything that they say. And of course, you could even argue that even if they were guilty of what they said, I'm not sure it's really grounds for a ban. But, okay, well, so it's a foreign entity. I mean, the BBC is a foreign entity. Are they not allowed to operate in the United States? I mean, China's not an enemy. We're not at war with China. China doesn't want to be at war with us. They're not an enemy. Just because we're paranoid and skittish does not make someone or something or a country a threat to us. But what really gets me is if Congress or the intelligence community has any kind of evidence that TikTok has done anything nefarious or represents an actual threat to national security, or they have a smoking gun, they have a internal memo from inside TikTok that proves that they have nefarious plans, then let's see them, right? Otherwise, back off. You don't have. I mean, if they can do this, it's a slippery slope argument. But if they can, they're going to start with a foreign entity, an entity that older people, let's say over 40, don't really much use or care about, and it's more vulnerable. But if this goes, it's going to be other stuff next, right? It never ends. It really just history shows that.
I don't even know how this one goes, frankly. I mean, it's pretty astonishing. And the reason why I'm saying the Israel-Gaza thing is because this was stuff that these guys owned up to. I mean, Bernie Sanders even pointed out that, there would be people who would know full well it's a genocide, but they can't come out and say anything because they don't want to get taken out politically. And, what was it? Thomas Massey was pointing out that many of these Congress members, the majority, have an Israeli minder, almost like on YouTube. If you have 100,000 views on YouTube, you have your own YouTube person who you can talk to about various issues, your own coordinator. It's effectively Israel have their coordinators associated with these politicians. If you're spending $100 million, think about how much political clout that buys you all across the United States in these races. And if you, after spending that much money, say, hey, this site is a problem because it's exposing too much of the people that we're killing. We didn't like, them showing that valiant portrayal of the Israeli soldier that shot a baby bravely. We don't like that. bothers us. So we need you to actually take political action to get rid of this. All of them know that this is a breach of any notion of the First Amendment. They don't care. They don't care. It's astonishing. Like, I give you another one. Going after, oh, what is it called? It's that system. It's not even the system. It's the movement against Israel, boycott, divest, and sanction, BDS, where you have it in various states where they would try to outlaw people backing BDS, which again is complete flagrantly going after the First Amendment right of Americans. And yet they would do it at the behest of Israel, and they would do it in these various states. I guess my point is TikTok is a problem for them for various reasons, but definitely for that. And for the US, that's something that we want to have more control over either way. You look at it. And by the way, we were victims of it too. I mean, whether it was RT, whether it was Sputnik, whether it's TikTok, this is stuff that they've done in Europe also, where they are openly saying that they want to now go after Twitter or go after some of these American tech companies, which is part of the reason why Zuckerberg right now is trying to lobby Trump to protect it from Europe and the rules that Europe is going along with in order to go after tech companies. This is a bad way for us to go as Americans if they allow this to go through. Do you think the court is going to allow this, by the way?
Well, in recent years, the tendency that the court is planning to rule on has become increasingly transparent during oral arguments. That didn't always used to be the case. Sometimes they would surprise you after asking some questions that seemed to indicate that they were leaning one way, and then the ruling would come down the other way. So if that's the case, the questioning definitely seems to indicate that the conservative majority is going to side with the government here, and they're going to prioritize national security over First Amendment rights.
Wow.
Justice Barrett has said previously, I don't think she brought it up in oral arguments, but she has said previously, she doesn't believe that foreign entities or foreign nationals have First Amendment rights in the United States. Now, that's extremely problematic, regardless of where you are ideologically, to have a justice on the U.S. Supreme Court who has such a fundamental misunderstanding of the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights, the Constitution, all constitutional rights, habeas corpus, etc., they all apply to, including the First Amendment, they apply to every living human being who happens to be walking around on U.S. territory, whether they're an undocumented worker, a migrant, a felon, a criminal, a foreigner, makes no difference. It's like, you have First Amendment rights if you're in the United States. 170 million people, most of whom are Americans, use TikTok, on a regular basis. But so they have their First Amendment rights are being quashed here. This is government censorship. I mean,
Yes, it is.
they're playing it cute by saying, well, we're not forcing them to shut down. We're merely forcing a sale. Well, the thing is, okay, the problem with that theory is, like, even if you were forcing a sale, that's assuming there's a buyer, right? I mean,
Right.
you don't know that. I mean, maybe there's no buyer at all, or maybe there's no buyer who can run the company. I mean, another interesting phenomenon here, though, I mean, it gives me a little faith, is that the government is playing censorship whack-a-mole here. I mean, this content is going to come out, okay? It'll come, if you can close TikTok down, the free market will see an opportunity here in Silicon Valley to create something that will replace it. No way are the Peter Thiels of the world looking at this and saying, man, I don't want that 170 million users for myself. Someone's going to want them, right?
Yeah.
So it'll be, so something will replace it, and they're going to be right back at it again. And this time they're going to have to come up with an excuse that's more authoritarian and that's even less legal and less constitutional to block an American entity. They'll come up with something else. This is, I mean, there's a lot of concern, I think rightfully so, that Trump has authoritarian tendencies, but we're seeing the authoritarian tendencies coming from both major parties here. It was extremely disturbing to me that Democrats and Republicans voted overwhelmingly in favor of this TikTok legislation, and no one had anything to say about why.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah, so true. 1,000% true. Like, it's, Yeah, it's outrageous. And I guess I am bugged by this specifically because I feel like I got fired for some nonsense on the same level. Like this
Yeah.
idea of, and then it's like, like Malik would say, too cute by half. Because what you're really doing is, we don't like what you're saying. And so we need to find a way for you to stop saying it. And we can't go with it directly because we have a First Amendment rights that prevents us, a tyrannical government, from doing exactly what tyrannical governments wants to do when they're dealing with something that is going against our own narrative of events. And so what we're going to do is not go after it directly. We're going to go at it in this kind of indirect means of, well, it's a foreign entity and we don't, this is about national security. That's what it is. It's national security. It's just outrageous. It's
It's
just
cat
aggravating.
videos, like you said.
Yeah.
I mean, it's funny dances, right? I mean,
Yeah.
some of it's political, whatever. But let's just say for the sake of, I mean, really, truly, their excuse is, it's really lame. It's like, oh, they're scooping up American user data to do what? I mean, what? I mean, I know that the Chinese, intelligence agencies have my address, my social security number, and so does Nigerian intelligence and French intelligence and English intelligence and Japanese intelligence. They all do.
Yeah.
And I guess I'm not that. Those horses have run out of the barn years ago. Privacy is no more. And what exactly are the Chinese going to do by knowing my social security number? Are they going to run up my credit cards? I mean, what are they going to do, really?
Yep.
I mean, are they coming to arrest me personally? Are they going to send a drone to my apartment and blow me up? I'm just waiting. I just want to know what the threat is here. And if there's a real threat, well, then honestly, then they should tell us what it is, because so that we can protect ourselves also. And so we can make sure nothing like TikTok ever happens again. We deserve to know. We pay their salaries. We pay for these intelligence agencies. If they know something, they should tell us what it is. They don't know what I just don't believe them.
No, nor do I. And it's going to be super interesting, but 175 million people are not going to be able to access TikTok. And because of quote unquote national security reasons, that nonsense that they're giving for it. The other thing I want to hit is Los Angeles Fire Department. Now, I stayed off the story because I wasn't exactly sure what went wrong. Okay, because I wasn't sure what went wrong, I didn't necessarily want to pile on and hit the federal or hit the local government, if indeed it wasn't necessarily their fault. The fire is just astonishing. To look at the scale of that fire and to look at, so far we haven't had a huge number of deaths, but the fire has been horrible. So come to find out, this came out from Drop Site News. This is Ryan Grimm's thing. They have been doing really good work. So right here, the Los Angeles Fire Department knew it was severely underfunded long before this fire. Quote, we don't have enough firefighters and medics. We don't have enough fire engines. We don't have enough trucks and ambulances in the field, unquote. Freddie Escobar, an LAFD captain, second, told the city during his testimony at a budget meeting on May 1st, 2024, quote, and we don't have the equipment and the staffing that we need to respond to 500,000 emergency calls every year, unquote, Escobar said, who is the union president of the United Firefighters of Los Angeles City. And so the captain explained that they demanded for fire and rescue had doubled while resources dwindled. Quote, the LAFD has fewer firefighters and medics today than we did 15 years ago, but our emergency calls for our services has increased by more than 50% during that same time. And this last part, it says emergency vehicles were out of commission in Los Angeles because they had not been allocated to hire sheet metal workers and mechanics to fix them. This includes 40 fire engines, quote, which carry water and used to fight fires, unquote. 36 ambulances, 10 fire trucks, which carry equipment like ladders and rescue supplies. As Captain Chung Ho testified during the budget hearing, quote, it just makes no sense to have millions of dollars of fire trucks and engines taken out of service and sideline because we don't have enough mechanics to keep them running. And right here, quote, we're at a breaking point where our firefighters can no longer do more with less, testified Fire Chief Kristen Crowley in a budget hearing at City Hall concerning the 2024-2025 fiscal year. She made clear that the LAFD was struggling, quote, the service delivery model is no longer sustainable, unquote. And this article goes further into the difficulties that the fire department was having. Effectively, they cut services and expected them to do more with less. And now we have this massive fire, and people are going to be pointing the finger who was responsible for this. Give me your take on this, because I want to go to Newsom after you give me a take, because what Newsom doing here is a bit of deflection into let's focus on the future, and that's not necessarily focus on now, but I'm not sure that's going to work. Give me your thoughts, Ted.
Well, I have a little bit of insight about LA. I've worked there as a radio talk show host at KFI Radio in LA.
Did you?
I was also the editorial cartoonist at the Los Angeles Times for years. And ultimately, I was let go, in a sort of corrupt deal where the LAPD pension fund bought the LA Times and demanded that I be fired and smeared because I had done cartoons critical of the LAPD. What I discovered in all of this, and I fought this all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. What I discovered in going after, in being part of LA politics, is there are some major systemic problems politically in Southern California. And first of all, the corruption goes from top to bottom. And basically, even though it's the second biggest city in the country, it's basically run like Tuscaloosa. It's like everybody knows everybody. Everybody's working for everyone. Everyone's dating everyone. Everyone's working with each other. They're all bribing each other. I mean, the corruption is rampant in that city. And one of the reasons they get away with it is because, unlike New York City, where, Mayor Adams, for example, is under constant attack by major media organizations because it's the capital of the nation's media is here in New York. In LA, there's only one major media outlet, really, and that's the LA Times. Now, there's no alt weekly to speak of. There's all the other organizations, like including public radio, they all get their news from the LA Times, and the LA Times is deeply intertwined. So no one's ever holding these people's feet to, I hate to use this pun right now, the fire, right?
Yeah.
So the point is that this is the kind of thing, there's really no accountability for politicians there. And, this story it rings very true. Would more equipment have been able to necessarily stop, 100-mile-an-hour winds with 100-foot-high flames with extremely dry conditions? Maybe not. But here's the thing. Firefighting, and that is true about New York too, is always a tempting budget cut for politicians, because for the most part, firefighters don't do anything. For the most part, they sit around and cook at the firehouse. And when you only need them 1% of the time, but when you need them, you really need them, right?
Yeah.
But it's hard for, you need cops every day. Firefighters, mostly they're not doing anything. And so that's like, politicians are like, why are we paying for this? They can do more with less, maybe there's better equipment, blah, blah, blah. The thing is, it's not surprising that something like this would happen. has some major, and all of California has never really recovered from Proposition 13, passed in the late 1970s, that gutted the tax flow system into state coffers and limited property taxes, which is a major source of revenue for California municipalities. LA has, there's some major budgetary constraints there. The main tax base there is Hollywood and entertainment. It got gutted during the pandemic. They're still not back up to full throttle. I mean, if you don't believe me, go look at your local movie listings. Like, nothing's playing, right? Still, because there's not a lot of movies in the pipeline. They're not back up. So they're not getting taxes there. And so anyway, it's not that surprising, but this is only going to get worse, right? And I think this is not even just a question of you need more firefighters and you need more equipment. I think you have to maybe completely rethink your entire fire strategy, given the fact that the climate of Southern California, always dry, always wildfires, always an issue, is getting worse. It's getting hotter and drier, and they've got to do something. They've got this is a systemic issue. Maybe so many people shouldn't live there, and you have a breakdown of the insurance system. I mean, and I don't really blame home insurers for saying we can't make money here They can't. I don't see how they can. How can you insure like a $4 million house, which, you know, in Southern California, a $4 million house is a middle class house. How are you going to insure a $4 million house, you know, when it's going to burn down every 3 years?
You read my mind. And that's what I was going to go to. Because apparently a lot of the insurance companies, people are complaining that their insurance was canceled like a few months before the fire actually hit. And this puts me to mind kind of like in certain areas of Florida where it's like, okay, you know a hurricane is going to hit this house. You know it. The moment that you build it, I know that you like overlooking the ocean, but you know this house is going to be toast the moment that the first hurricane comes. It's a disposable house. Yeah. And so the insurance company is like, I don't want to pay money for a house that I know is going to be destroyed.
They're not wrong. They're really not wrong. I mean, and it reminds me of, you know, I used to live in Eastern Long Island in the Hamptons. The sign at every little town, Wainscott, East Hampton, whatever, it always says settled 1620, settled 1630. And I remember one time driving around and just seeing those signs, and I was like, you know, there's nothing historic here, right? There's no old houses. And then it was like, hurricanes. Right? It's like, that's why they've all blown into the sea, right? So it's like, that's just, and that's Long Island, right? I mean, it's low lying, it's a sandbar. It's not even Florida. It's not going to get hit nearly as often, but it does get hit every 20, 30, 40 years by something pretty substantial. And so that's what this is going to be. They have a systemic issue. I mean, think about like a year ago when we were reading about the federal government, we covered this on our shows, right? The Colorado River Basin problem, where they were trying to apportion what's left of the Colorado River to all the various states. You know, they're trying, you know, California, which is gobbling up a gallon for every almond, every single almond gets a gallon of water to grow it. Yeah. I mean, maybe we got to stick to walnuts and not have almonds. You know, I mean, it's like, I mean, it is kind of crazy. I mean, I've spent a lot of time driving around California, and I was always like, this doesn't feel like a hospitable place. Like my ex-wife was from California. She's like,
but it seems like
it's dry.
Certainly
it's scary. Like if you broke down, like if you're driving on Interstate 5 between San Francisco and Los Angeles, and your car broke down, you're kind of in trouble, right? Because it's like there's no water. There's no.
See, I don't have a context. I've only been to California like once to cover. In fact, I was there to cover an event.
It's hot. There's rattlesnakes. It's like people aren't really supposed to live there in vast numbers, and they do.
I guess. Oh, yeah. Okay. I mean, I feel like this is a conversation with Florida also. In some respects, it's like, okay, are you sure you really want to put a house in that spot, and should we be on the hook for it if you do? Yeah,
I don't think the taxpayers should be. You know, and like I understand why people want to live in interesting, strange places, but I mean, come on, it's all intertwined here. Mark my words, right? These fires, you know what's coming next, right? They have major floods. Like a year ago, there were major floods and rains in Los Angeles, right? That never used to happen before. So what's going to happen? All the trees are gone. They all burned up. Well, it's going to rain. The mudslides are next, okay? And they're going to be worse than they ever would be because there's no roots holding the land together, holding the hills up. You see these houses up on half the houses on stilts. I mean, you know, this is like, it's not sustainable. Yeah. And I understand why people like it because the weather's nice, I guess. Not my kind of weather, but I know people like it. But it's like, so people like all sorts of things. You know, it's just not, it doesn't work. We have lots of room in the middle of the country that's a lot safer. I mean, you know, move to the Midwest.
Well, Ted Raw, tell people to get the hell out of Dodge if you want to keep your house safe. Yeah, I mean, like you said, I understand why people want to be looking over the ocean. But you can't ask an insurance company to pay for your house when the ocean swallows that house up that's looking over the ocean. Ted Raw, political cartoonist, syndicated columnist, co-host of TMI, Too Much Information with the one and only Manila Chan, that starts from 10 to 12, Monday through Friday. Definitely check him out. Ted, man, always appreciate you, man. Thank you. I appreciate this.
Bye, Jamal.
Thank you. Have a good one. All right. The man himself waiting in the background, Dr. Mark Frost. He is a political analyst, professor, consultant, drummer, capitalist, Schuptenarian, and recovering libertarian. You can follow Mark on Twitter at FrostTheCash, and he is a great friend of this show. Mark, when this issue came up, I thought to myself, I wonder what does Mark think about this? How you doing, Mark?
I'm doing good. A little cabin fever down here in Georgia.
Yeah.
I'm sure the Northeasterners will laugh at us, but the first little bit of snow and ice, people shut down. So everything, GDP just went to zero almost. And so now's the first day that it's kind of not like that. So,
Oh, too funny,
yeah.
too funny. Yeah, we do laugh at you a little bit on that one, Mark. I used to live in New York. And so, I remember the first time I was born and raised in Richmond, Virginia. So there's a little bit of that in Richmond where there's a little bit of snow and everybody shuts down. And I remember when I first got to New York, it was like 5 inches. Like it was a heavy snow. It was it was half a foot to maybe a foot of snow. And my thinking is, all right, well, clearly they're going to shut down. And my ex-girlfriend was like, if you don't get your ass out of bed and go to work, there is no shutting down. Like
Right.
I remember one day it was like almost 2 feet of snow, and at 3:00 our company closed, saying, "All right, well, we're going to shut down a little bit early today because we want you guys to get home in time to avoid the snow." It had already been like a foot, if not a foot and a half of snow. So yeah, there's that. So I understand where you're coming from a little bit on that one, Mark. But I'm glad to have you though. Cabin fever or whatever. I'm still glad that you could join me today.
It's doing good. When weather's like that, as you know, I run the local humane society just on the side. And,
Yes.
we get so many calls about kittens found, dogs found, they're freezing and stuff. So I did get out in it because I was out, picking up, try to, we save the ones we can if we can.
Yeah.
So.
That is good of you, Mark. I mean, that's damn good of you, man. Let's start with sanctions, since that's kind of what the focus point of the show.
Sure.
Joe Biden, on his way out, has decided to pass sanctions. Now, I played the clip of Jen Psaki, where the first time Joe Biden did this, when the Ukraine war first happened, Joe Biden pushes Europe to pass sanctions on energy. And Psaki, when asked the question about whether or not that's going to hit Americans, even back then pointed out, well, our values are not without cost. Basically, we have to pay for our values. If you want nice things, you got to pay for those nice things. That including, if you want to pass sanctions on Russia, well, you have to pay for the fact that you're passing those sanctions, meaning we got to take a hit for it as Americans. Joe Biden did not want to pass sanctions going directly at the energy carriers, meaning the tankers, the ships that are doing the quote-unquote shadow fleet, as they call it, because he didn't necessarily want the cost of inflation, or for that matter, the cost of energy to just go through the roof. He's doing it now, though. And he's doing it now because he's on his way out. And what he's hoping is that any costs that Americans hit with are done so as Donald Trump is coming into office, where they could appropriate that cost and say, well, that's Donald Trump's cost because Donald Trump is president, missing the fact that Joe Biden is passing these sanctions on his way out in order to tie Donald Trump's hands. So even if Trump comes in and wants to get rid of them immediately, he may not be able to do so because Congress may not exactly allow him to do so. It's an astonishing thing when you look at one president trying to overtly sabotage another president. Give me your take. What is going to be the financial cost to Americans on this? Because, by the way, real quick, we can see a small tick up of costs now. And these are directly going to hit either India, China, and for that matter, all markets across the globe in general, just because this stuff is always multinational. But give me your take on this. What is going to be the immediate effect for Americans, if any?
The immediate effect is going to be statistically insignificant. I mean, if you look at the futures markets, anything that breaks expectations moves them a little bit. But everybody knows not only is Joe Biden a lame duck president, he's the lamest, duckiest president I've read, studied, or experienced in my lifetime.
Yeah.
Seriously, think about it. I've never seen anything quite like this. Usually the president-elect just shuts up. There's this kind of boring transfer of power.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like that anymore. World leaders there's basically a queue at, Mar-a-Lago for people to get in there and be seen. And nobody cares what Biden has to say, from what I can tell. Yeah. Certainly in markets, they don't care. Back to your sanctions. If you remember back on the Fault Line show, you guys had me on when that war first started.
Mm-hmm.
And we talked about sanctions. And I go, well, it's going to hurt Europe much more than it hurts Russia. I think at that particular show, I bought rubles that morning,
Yes,
if I
you did.
remember correctly. Yeah, and I was real
You made a
happy about
killing.
it. I was only
You
get
made
in
a
line, go
killing.
and buy more. So sanctions are a tax. I mean, if you think about it, especially when you tax commodities. So we can tax oil, natural gas. We can put sanctions on those sorts of things, but all it's doing is changing over the players where this stuff comes from, because it's all a commodity.
Right.
Think about it. I don't care whether the gasoline that I put into my car came from Saudi Arabia or it came from Venezuela. That's the whole nature of a commodity. You don't care. It's the classic Milton Friedman quote, you know, the baker does not care whether the wheat that went into his flour came from a capitalist or a communist country, you know. It's just the nature of a commodity. And if you look at what's going on in Europe, this has damaged Europe much more than it's done much to us, because we already have lots of natural gas. We have, we're fairly self-sufficient even in fossil fuels and things like that, and we can be so in 6 months, even more so, which, you know, to quote Donald Trump, it's going to be drill, drill, drill. That's what has set the expectations. So the future markets are banking on a pro fossil fuel energy Donald Trump administration, and you can clearly see what people are voting with their pocketbooks on that. Onto your theory, hypothesis, whatever you call it, is Biden trying to sabotage Trump? You know, that's a good question, because I'm not very conspiratorialist until recently, you know, until even back in the day, even the Hunter Biden laptop, I'm like, probably, you know, maybe it's misinformation. Well, when conspiracy theory after conspiracy theory is proven true, you start scratching your head and you're like, well, maybe I need to give these things more credence.
Yeah.
You know, I would have never believed the FBI had, what was it, 78 agents or 70 plus agents that were literally yelling at Mark. I don't know if you caught that, Joe Rogan, Mark Zuckerberg.
Yes.
That was fascinating. I mean, he said they'd be on the phone yelling at him, and, you know, and take this down, take that down.
Twitter files pointed that out.
So people have lost faith, I think, in, you know, in government, and it's not irrational. Even on the local side. I mean, if I lived in LA, I'd be pissed off. I'll just tell you right now.
Yeah.
All those people there act like, I mean, I don't know what's that mayor's name? Bass. She looked like a deer in headlights when that journalist from Sky was on the plane, and he goes, "Ma'am, do you have anything that you'd like to say to your constituents?" And she's like,
like, how did you fail so monstrably?
Yes, exactly. And at the core level of, I mean, let's just think about it philosophically. Why do we tolerate government in the first place? What makes the anarcho-capitalists or the anarcho-communists wrong? You know, we have government so we can collectively produce certain things.
Right.
Police, fire, you know, public works, water,
public safety. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And through a variety of bad luck and bad actors and idiots, those poor people are losing their homes, and things happen. But it's the leadership. It's just, if that was my mayor, she does not instill confidence in me, and that's what you want in a leader.
Yeah. Same thing with what's his name?
Gavin.
Newsom. Yeah, Newsom. Same thing. Doesn't inspire confidence. But just to point out something, I don't think it's a conspiracy theory that the president who's coming in, who called the new president Hitler and a fascist and say he should be in jail, who's going with a complete different orthodoxy, at the very least stated orthodoxy of wanting to end the war, that Joe Biden has invested himself completely into. Even WAPO, who I think is a pretty mainstream media outlet, pointed out that the entire point of these sanctions was to tie Donald Trump's hands when he comes in.
I think that will backfire if that's the intent, because I think I learned from you guys. I don't know if it was you or someone else on Fault Lines that said it, but I forgot who they quoted, but they're like, don't attribute to malice that which can be attributed to incompetence.
Right.
Something like that. And this hasn't, I almost wish this administration tried to plan it all out, because I don't think they did. I think it's an incompetent administration that isn't even consistent within its own stated values.
Yeah.
I have zero faith in the Biden administration. I'm going to argue they're probably the second worst administration in American history.
I think they're deeply incompetent. I don't think they planned it out in the sense of their plans coming to fruition. I just think they planned, like, this is what they were trying to do. It was kind of like, I disagree with Donald Trump trying to end the war. And so I need to do any and everything in my power to expand, or to at the very least prevent him from doing so. It's kind of that part. It's not that, yes, we have a clear plan of what is going to take place after the fact. Like, for example, I'll give you another one. Like when they were when all of this first started, I don't think for a moment that they plotted out, okay, we're going to pass sanctions, and the sanctions are going to do this, and they're going to do that, and they're going to have these effects, and blah, blah, blah. I think they stumbled into one failure after the next. We're going to destroy the Russian economy. Okay, well, that didn't work. We're going to destroy Russia and the military. Okay, well, that didn't work. Like, it was one bad idea after the next that they just stumbled into without any kind of realistic review of what's happening. I think it was that. And I think this is the exact same thing. It's spoiled milk. Even look at the 18-year-olds thing. It's like, well, we need Ukraine to keep fighting, so we need to draft the 18-year-olds, despite the fact that even Western media accepts that Ukraine is fundamentally lost. Like it's astonishing to me that this stuff goes on, but there's no real assessment of reality. There's no real assessment of behavior in the context of that reality. It's just spite at this point.
Well, and from my perspective, I've been very consistent on this kind of stuff since you guys met me. Mm-hmm. Government should not get involved in things that it can only make worse. And our involvement in the Russian-Ukraine so-called conflict can only make it worse. I, with all of my passion, believe that this would have been taken care of on its own. They would have got together, they would have worked out the problems. But it's like anything else. If we're going to say, you know what, we'll give you $200 billion and a bunch of equipment,
keep fighting.
And, well, of course, duh. So just the incentive structure that we laid down is just ridiculous. But I don't know if you caught the Zelensky interview on Lex Friedman.
Yes.
Did you catch that?
Yes.
So I thought that was very interesting, because clearly everybody knows there's a new sheriff in town and things are changing. Mm-hmm. And I like that, because if there's one message I think the election sent, and this is true across race, class, everything, people are liking America first.
Yes. I agree with America first.
Folks in Chicago, inner city Chicago, are like, you know what? Yeah, let's take care of our people first before we start giving out, prepaid Visa cards to, illegal aliens and all that kind of stuff.
And that was the argument I made. That's like, how can you be against looking out for the best interests of your own country first? Now, we may come to different assessment about what that means. Like, you can't have this fight about H-1B1, and not support America. Like, for example, you can't say, well, we don't have any enthusiastic, educated, qualified Americans for these jobs, so we must go and fill these jobs with India. But it's not really an America first position. And then say you want to get rid of the Department of Education, or you want to somehow gut American education while simultaneously telling me we don't have enough people to do that job. That's not an America first position. Like, I think it means something, or at the very least it should mean something. It shouldn't just be a catchphrase. So no, I agree with you on this. 1,000% agree with you. When I brought this up to you, you mentioned that you didn't think this was going to be a major impact, because for all intents and purposes, it hasn't been up to this point a major impact. There's always been ways to get around it. Like you said, commodities are international. They don't really care whether it's coming from Saudi Arabia, Russia, or for that matter, India or any other place. It's commodity. It's just going to end up. So you don't believe that this is really going to have a major impact, considering Trump is coming in immediately after. You said the thing that you thought was going to have a major impact was detention. Like basically, because at a certain point, detention becomes a commodity. Strangely enough, even though it kind of is, where somebody's going to have to offer some space for that person to be kept in, if indeed Donald Trump is going to go and try to get millions of people deported. Give me your take on that. Why do you think this is going to be a major issue that up to this point we haven't really talked about it or discussed, or no one is really talking about it currently?
I think when I texted that to you, I was in my car and it
Mhm.
said detention. And what I think I said, Siri misquoted me. I think what I meant to say was tension. Yeah, not detention.
Oh,
Tension.
I see. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So it's the
Damn spell
tension in
check.
the markets that it can move. You know, I mean, you can deport massive amounts of people if you want to spend the money to do it. And the question is, my best guess is it's $100 billion to get rid of the ones we really don't want.
Yeah.
And is that worth paying? I'm going to argue it is, because you need a few things to have a country. You need you need money. If you don't have money, then you're somebody else's vassal state. You need a border, and you need some form of military deterrence. I mean, that's the three things you need to be a country. And if you don't have that, then you're really not a sovereign country. And I think that's the number one thing the Democrats blew in the election. They came across as just not caring, or either too incompetent to deal with it, or they didn't care about it enough, and it backfired on them. It backfired just yeah. I mean, we've been through that. Everybody knows kind of the postpartum on the election. What Biden's doing with his executive orders is going to be undone, because what can be done via executive order can be undone via executive order. Trump's going to have a honeymoon for all of the saber rattling, and senators like to listen to themselves talk, you know, and the Congress can't Congress cannot adjourn unless every senator has said the one thing that needs to be said. And so he's going to get his honeymoon. He's going to get his appointments. What I think is real is there is a thing called the military industrial complex. There is something there. It's a conceptual umbrella of like-minded interests that have a vested interest in war.
Yes.
Likewise, there's the security industrial complex. Look at you and I are fans of Tulsi Gabbard, I believe.
Yeah.
Look at what they're trying to do to her. You know, they're trying to throw everything they can at her. She's not qualified. She's this. She's that. You know, she doesn't love war enough to be in that position. Is basically what they're saying.
And they're trying to get her to agree to the FISA stuff. I mean, Langford was here. I mean, he was on, I think, the media yesterday, basically saying that they need her to change her position on that she's okay with FISA. And it's like, he's making this argument that FISA doesn't apply to Americans, which is, of course, a lie. I mean, even for Donald Trump, if you remember, this thing of reading the person who they're talking to allows them to see the American on the other end of that conversation. I'm sorry, please.
Well, no, yeah, no, you're exactly right. And, you know, she bent a little bit. She's like, well, you know, okay, I can, if they're not citizens, I can go along a little bit with that, because you gotta get nominated and confirmed first, right? Then you go do what you want to do. Look at Supreme Court justices. That's there's an entire discipline of study around Supreme Court justices that don't go the way that the people that nominated them wanted them to.
Yep.
You know, it's just how it works. And so I'm still pretty bullish. My only worry about Trump is I hope we don't end up with Bush 3. That's my only concern. But right now it's a tiny concern. I'm like, oh, okay, I hope they don't do that. But markets in general, even Democrats, you know, I have a lot of clients in Fulton County, you know, downtown Atlanta. You know, they tend to be at least they lean Democrat, and privately they're all happy. They're like, yeah, we need less regulation. We need to have more pro business government, you know, blah, blah, blah. And so I think things are going to go well from there. Europe is the one that's in trouble right now. People don't realize that Americans, because the mainstream media doesn't report on anything.
Right.
I mean, I don't know about you. I get my news from, the Times of India and, German newspapers and
I get them all over too. Yeah.
and YouTube and social media. I want to hear what the people there are saying and what they're feeling. And they're kind of feeling a similar thing to Americans, is from best I can tell. They're like, whatever. Okay, great. America first. How about Britain first? How about, Germany first? How about we take care of ourselves for once?
But see, the moment they say it, they would say, well, these people are rushing back. Like, that's, if you think
Yes.
about it, we were
Right. I'm a Russian asset. You're a Russian asset. Everybody's a Russian asset.
Everybody's a
which
Russian
is
asset when you don't
absurd.
agree to just getting involved into the war stuff. I mean, if you and look at what they're doing, which is the shocking part. The governments that say we're not on board for what you guys are doing with this war stuff, they say, well, those governments are rushing back. And it's like, they're not rushing back. They're like, so for the Georgian government, for example, the Georgian government would say, well, look, we are not for a war, full stop. And Europe tries to overthrow the democratically elected Georgian government and is using the president who was born in France kind of as a vector, as a means of trying to get it like a Maidan operation in Georgia, similar to what they did in Ukraine. Well, they even called it Maidan 2.0. Like, they was like, you are not going to do to us what you did to Ukraine. And they would say, well, that is a pro-Georgian, a pro-Russian government. It is pro-Georgian. Same thing with Romania. A pro-Romanian government gets cast as Russian-leaning. It's bizarre, like what they're trying to do and the language that they're trying to use for it. Fico nearly was killed, and Fico believed that a good reason why he was initially killed was because of his position on being against the Ukrainian war.
Yes.
Same thing with Orban. They would say he is Russian-leaning, despite the fact that the man is just a Hungarian nationalist. It is super bizarre. And to your point, Europe has been taking a hit all the way through. Paying 5 times more for energy is just destructive to society in ways that we in America can't necessarily fathom. Or paying all of this money for NATO, where Trump is now telling Europe, I need you to pay 5%. Okay, well, the majority of the money is going to come to us, which is the reason why he's saying it, but he doesn't quite get how damaging it is to Europe to have to do it. And yet Europe, for the most part, has been willing to go along either with the sanctions on energy, the blowing up of Nord Stream pipeline, the increasing in the money that they're giving to the U.S. on
Now
behalf
that,
of
I think, that is something that I think has gone way underreported in the United States, because I believe, first of all, I'm an environmentalist. I'm not insane. I don't want to go back to bearskins and stone knives, but I believe part of what government has to do is control for negative externalities, because if you let the steel, or the foundry or the steel, mill, throw trash into rivers,
they'll do it.
That's the problem of the people downstream. So, so regulations, markets, those sorts of things, that's a critical thing. Well, just from an environmental perspective, that was the largest man-made release of
methane.
Of methane and just generally carbonized material that was let into the atmosphere in human history. It also completely and totally changed German politics, because there are people there, they call them right-wingers. I don't know if they are or not, but they're like, okay, was our own government complicit in this?
Yes.
Because that's an act of war. I mean, if we unilaterally, because let's be honest, Ukraine didn't do it.
Right.
They didn't have that capability.
Joe Biden has been, if you remember, Joe Biden said if Russia goes in, we're going to end that pipeline. And they said, how are you going to do it? Joe Biden said, we'll do it. Guess who was standing beside Joe Biden when he said that? Schultz. Schultz was literally on stage with Joe Biden when Joe Biden said, we will take that pipeline down. So if he wasn't part of it, I mean, and think of like the indignity of standing there when somebody is saying a pipeline that they had nothing to do with, that they're going to blow it up. And your response is kind of like this kind of muted response when they're talking about your pipeline. Like, that pipeline was instrumental for Europe and for that matter, for Germany to get energy. They built that pipeline because they needed that pipeline. I've been in
Yes.
Germany. I've seen how expensive the energy is in Germany. That's something they need. It wasn't just we did it for no reason. And then for the US to blow it up and for Germany to not be able to say the thing that everybody knows is true. Unless Joe
Right.
Biden was psychic or he had remote viewers on staff, I'm going to say the US did it. Seymour
Right.
Hersh's piece was right.
And it's my belief. Matter of fact, I talked about this 20 years ago in a paper on EMU. I think NATO is a dangerous anachronism now. I see no need for NATO to even exist.
Same here.
You don't have to love Putin. You don't have to have some great affinity for Russia. I certainly don't. I like the people. I've been there. I did some great traveling there. But you don't have to like a country's leaders to do business with them.
Right.
And whether, other than Afghanistan, which was done during the Soviet Union, Russia historically has not been an expansionist country. They haven't. They just haven't. Now you can say, well, no, look what they did there, here and there. The entire Ukraine war, the entire thing was sparked by us over the last 30 years, where we, you can only disrespect people so long before they start to become full of contempt for you. And that's kind of what happened. We blew the peace dividend. We blew all those opportunities. And there are people clearly in our government, the neocons, the people that just, they won't rest until Russia is a fifth world power, basically. And they're willing to go to nuclear brinksmanship and risk that in pursuit of that complete and total destruction of Russia, because they still can't believe that Russia is Russia and it's not the Soviet Union anymore.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, in some circles, I think Trump woke people up to the Ukraine war. But even in Israel, I mean, I think I could go on your show and use the N-word 800,000 times and get in less trouble than if I say something negative about the
Israelis. Yeah.
Am I wrong?
No, you're not wrong.
Right.
I mean,
Look what happened to Candace. Candace Owens, Daily Wire. I mean, the Daily Wire melted down. They've lost, I think, about a fourth of their audience. People got tired of that. I mean, you got Candace Owens, you have Brett Cooper. They're two star performers, and they just, apparently, if you say something Ben Shapiro doesn't like, then you get fired. And
despite the fact that Ben Shapiro complains about free speech for conservatives,
yes, which I don't like. I mean, either you believe in it or you don't. But we're a publisher. Agreed. We're a publisher. We can do, well, okay, fine. But the fact is, you have two big stars that are highly influential, and they had a different take than you. Neither of them said, you know what, we want the Palestinians to go and destroy Israel from, from the bank to the sea. Nothing was that. It was just saying, Candace basically just said, can we look and see what's going on with the Palestinians right now, and basically the genocide that's going on in as a result of the Israeli war effort there. And is this beyond proportionality? And that's all she said. I mean, if you actually go listen to what she said, and then she got Anti-Semite of the Year award,
right.
It's just so stupid.
Well, what's all about that too, just to back you up on that. Now they're talking about it on mainstream media as Joe Biden is leaving. Have you noticed that? Like 60 Minutes came out with a piece where they went fully in on this idea that, look at American weapons. These are little kids playing with American weapon shells. The various people who resigned from the government because they were saying how effectively the U.S. government was allowing starvation, or for that matter, mass murder. And the U.S. knew about it, wasn't doing anything about it. You have a piece that came out for Jack Lew, ambassador to Israel, who basically died inside, apparently, over the course of this administration, saying that regardless of what was coming out in the media, there was no opposition to anything Israel was doing, either in Lebanon or for that matter, Gaza or in the West Bank. It's just nobody could say anything.
And then reasoned discourse, like my position is, of course, Israel has the right to defend itself. Of course. But if Al-Qaeda blows up a building, I don't want to drop nukes,
right,
on some country. There has to be some level of proportionality that is done, and certainly someone should be able to raise their hand and say, are we going too far? Is this?
And by the way, just to back up on that one too, we don't allow that premise for anybody else. Like if Hamas blew up a McDonald's and there were, let's say, 50 Israelis in it, one of them was a soldier, we wouldn't accept that. It was like, well, yeah, but that was with that one guy that we were trying to get in that apartment building, or that one guy we were trying to get at the post office. It's like, yeah, but you killed 50 people to get that one guy. I know, but that was an Israeli soldier. They were a dog catcher in the Israeli military.
Right.
We would never accept that premise. And yet, that's the premise that we are continuously asked to accept. Well, there was one guy in that camp of 50 people that you just killed. Yeah, but we needed to get that one guy. We think we got him. It's just Mark, this stuff is outrageous, man. Dude, man, Mark, always appreciate you, man. I really
love being here, man. I love your show. Love what you're doing. I'm a big fan.
Thank you. I really do appreciate it. Mark Frost, economist, professor, drummer, Eagle Scout, Marine, capitalist, Schumpeterian, and recovering libertarian. You can follow Mark on Twitter at FrostyCash. Thank you, my man. I really appreciate you, Mark. Thank you.
Thank you, man. Bye-bye.
You have a good one. All right. Mark Sloboda. I'm sorry. I'll say Mark Frost. Much to Mark Sloboda. Mark Frost. Always appreciate him. Mark has been coming on and been giving damn good commentary from very early on. What's funny about it, it's like capitalist Jupiterian, but a sane capitalist. Oh, okay. I screwed up a little bit this morning. Let me do this. Copy this and this. I'm sorry. There we are. I guess I forgot to send him the link. I thought I sent the link. It's above. Join at your leisure. Yeah, so my guest is going to come in, Joe Emmensberger. He is going to have this conversation about Venezuela. Weirdly enough, also on his way out, the Biden administration has decided to put a bounty on the head of Nicolas Maduro. Now, Maduro is the president of Venezuela. And if you remember, we've had this canard once before where they tried to act like Juan Guaido was president of a country to which he was not president of. And even went as far as to try to have this kind of violent overthrow that went nowhere in the middle of the street in Venezuela. And yet they still ran around with this fiction as if that Juan Guaido was somehow president. Well, we now have a new Juan Guaido 2.0. So let's get some more information about Juan Guaido 2.0 and the $20 million bounty that the Biden administration has put on the head of Nicolas Maduro, the actual Venezuelan president. We're joined with Joe Emmensberger. He's a journalist and author, co-writer of The Extraordinary Threat, the U.S. Empire, the Media, and the 20 Years of Coup Attempts in Venezuela. You are the man to talk to today. How you doing, Joe? You doing all right?
Good. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you for joining me, man. I really do appreciate you joining me on this. Like I said, you're the person to talk to. So the Biden administration is going with their Juan Guaido 2.0, and they've put a $20 million bounty on Nicolas Maduro's head, and they've apparently anointed a new president for Venezuela, which will be news to the Venezuelan people. But whatever, the U.S. has anointed their Venezuelan president. Who is this guy, and how on earth is the U.S. putting a bounty on the head of a president of a country? Give me your thoughts on this.
Yeah, the bounty goes back to the Trump era. They increased the bounty that was already on. They already placed on the heads of the top of the Venezuelan president Maduro and some of his top.
Just outrageous.
So it's continuity. You know, Mike Pompeo made this joke. You know, when they were trying to steal the 2020 election for Trump, Mike Pompeo made this joke that there's going to be a smooth transition to a second Trump term. Well, he turned out he wasn't wrong, because Biden was the smooth transition. Policy. Back then, like you said, Juan Guaido was their man. He wandered around Venezuela, never got arrested, and eventually became such a pathetic figure they had to ditch him. And now they have arguably an even more pathetic figure. Edmundo Gonzalez was a very relatively unknown diplomat, longtime diplomat, Venezuelan diplomat. He was stationed in El Salvador during the worst atrocities of the 1980s. He was the government's Venezuelan government's man in El Salvador, apparently supportive of the fascists who were just running amok in El Salvador at that time. So, but he only became a presidential candidate because Maria Corina Machado, she's considered the most important leader right now of the Venezuelan opposition. Justin and I talk about her a fair amount in our book, because her efforts to overthrow the Venezuelan government go all the way back to 2002. Very obvious efforts, yeah. So, but she was not allowed to run because of all her sedition. Obviously, she's not granted political rights. You know, she should be in jail by rights, but the government is careful, as they were with Guaido. You know, Guaido deserved to be in jail. Absolutely. He's an agent of a foreign power, strangling your country economically, which is murderous, and trying to overthrow your government. He should have been in jail many times over, but because you're dealing with an agent of the world's most powerful country, you have to be careful. Right. So what they did was they made arrests of people around him, but left him alone and basically let him burn himself out. And they've taken the same approach with Machado. They've arrested people close to her, very selective about who they arrest, but kind of a lot of times the biggest blowhards, the biggest noisemakers, they've chosen the approach they've taken successfully thus far is to basically leave them alone, monitor them, survey them, but not actually arrest them. So Machado says she's in hiding, which is ridiculous. I mean, if the Venezuelan intelligence services aren't capable of finding her, she's going to appeal for a rally, then go back into hiding. So it's pretty ridiculous. She's a ridiculous figure. She's becoming just as ridiculous a figure as Juan Guaido, but she is actually everybody in Venezuela knows that she is the actual leader, and Mundo is just her puppet, basically. So, which makes him an even more ridiculous figure in that sense than Guaido was, because he's basically out of the country.
Okay, that's what I was about to ask you. He's not even in Venezuela. He's outside of Venezuela, and they're claiming he's the president. Did he win an election by chance?
No, because first of all, because he's an obvious proxy of Machado, he should never been allowed to run anyway, because he was obviously just a puppet of Machado's who was not allowed for running. So it was just his whole candidacy was basically floating the law from the beginning. So what happened was but they let him run. They had the election. The electoral authorities declared Maduro the winner. And because there was the opposition was stirring up noise saying that they'll know we have tallies showing that we won. So what they did was they went to there's a special chamber of the Supreme Court that oversees elections, and they reviewed all the electoral materials. Gonzalez and his side didn't even present anything to the authorities there, and the authorities said yes, we're the results stand, and Maduro's now they're the ultimate. They're like the U.S. Supreme Court. You know, if the U.S. has an election and it's disputed, you go to the Supreme Court. If the Supreme Court decides, you may not like what the Supreme Court decides, but you don't therefore go to Venezuela and say, okay, choose our president for us.
Right. It's like you had the election, Nicolas Maduro wins. Yeah. The U.S. candidate comes back and says, well, wait a minute, we have information saying that we won. And says, okay, well, you go to the court, and then they don't present anything. Yeah. And then the U.S. comes back and says, well, our candidate actually won, despite what the Supreme Court and despite what the voters are saying. We have decided that this is the new president, and the person who that person is representing is in hiding, quote unquote, in Venezuela. So the guy that the U.S. is saying won hasn't gotten any votes, correct?
Well, he got votes, but he didn't win according to the.
He didn't win. No. Okay. So no, but it's the person who is the real opposition is in Venezuela.
Yeah, Machado got no votes because she couldn't run. Same with Guaido. Guaido never ran for president. His case was a little different. Guaido was he was in the National Assembly.
Right.
He was appointed by the opposition forces who had control at that time. He was appointed the president of the National Assembly, and so they used the constitutional argument to claim that he's the interim president. It had no validity whatsoever.
But in this case, this person ran and just lost.
This
person who ran wasn't even the main power center for the opposition. That person is in Venezuela.
He was just a puppet candidate floating the law which barred Machado. He ran, which was already floating the law, and they let him get away with it. But again, the Venezuelan government, they're up against the most powerful country in the world, the country that's sponsoring a Holocaust in Gaza. This is a country with no scruples. The elite in Washington are so Nazified. They have no scruples whatsoever. And so they have to be careful. They're careful how they deal with this.
And look, they handled Guaido quite well. I mean, for all intents and purposes, they didn't kill. It's like Guaido was, somebody put an article, he was the safest man on the planet for that very specific reason that you mentioned. It was like nobody is going to hit Guaido. Guaido could walk through Venezuela, the most safest guy on the planet, because nobody wanted to invoke the wrath. And
that was my concern. You know, I was concerned about that. I was concerned. What if some opposition forces decide to stage a false flag by a side? But again, the Venezuelan authorities, I'm sure they protected him well, because, like you said, there's other forces who could try to stir things up by trying to kill him. So, but he did nothing happened to him except for some crowds threw coffee at him and stuff. I mean, he was thoroughly despised.
Yeah, they hated him. I mean, because he wanted to overthrow the government, like even if it was a violent overthrow. And that was the wild part. When there was those military officers that came in, I believe Civil Corps and something else. Well, Guaido was perfectly fine with overthrowing Maduro, even if it was through violent means. So you can imagine that if you're a Venezuelan and you hear that, you're going to feel some kind of way about that.
Yeah, not only that, but he's responsible. He's directly supportive of the economic strangulation of Venezuela that's been going on. It really started under Obama in 2015, but then it dramatically intensified under Trump in 2017. So
go into that for me and explain the impact of those sanctions on Venezuelan life.
Yeah, we wrote about this in our book. We detailed the numbers, but basically, at the height of the sanctions, they were taking like 13 to 20 billion dollars a year from Venezuela. It was a massive amount because Venezuela is already under a huge economic contraction. So you're talking like roughly like the numbers translate to something like 20% up to 20% of GDP. It's just a massive. I mean, they're harsher than the sanctions that were imposed internationally on South Africa during apartheid. It's just absolutely economic strangulation. It's just absolutely barbaric. And Guaido and all the opposition forces, they support that. This Machado, all this. Machado's even called for foreign invasion. She's made no secret of this. She's wrote about it on Twitter in English. She's made clear what she wants. And like I said, she was involved with coup attempts going back all the way to 2002. She met with George W. Bush when he was in the White House. And trying to gin up support for U.S. Helping them overthrow the government. She's been involved in this for decades, and she's never gone to jail for it. She's been booted out of the National Assembly at one point several years ago. She put out this absolutely insane video wearing a raincoat in the sunshine the other day, whispering and saying that Venezuela will be free one day. It was so ridiculous. She's a really ridiculous figure, but she goes back decades in doing this, and so they've handled her so far well. But these sanctions are absolutely devastating, and there's no end in sight really to that. They could even get more. Biden kind of Biden, in order to please Chevron and some other companies, kind of weakened the sanctions significantly, not totally, but significantly. But and because things were going bad in, well, they still are going bad in Ukraine, and oil prices spiking, and that that encouraged the U.S. to that incentivized them to kind of weaken the sanctions a little bit on Venezuela to get more oil supply.
Right.
I don't know if the same conditions will hold going forward. We don't know. Oil prices are unpredictable. But yeah, a lot of things, how Biden proceeds or how Trump proceeds, same thing. How Trump proceeds from here on, he will possibly, in my opinion, likely re-intensify the sanctions. And I was very worried actually about this inauguration because the Western imperialists, I think, were very emboldened by the fall of Syria. By some of the success that Israel's had recently against Hezbollah, and I think they were very emboldened by that. You see that in some of the language Trump's using about, he wants to take over Greenland, take over Canada, take over Panama. He's like, he's absolutely berserk. And I see some of that hubris, from you have a little bit of success and you think, well, why not go for it? Maybe we can, really gamble and try to overthrow everybody. But fortunately, fortunately, it went up without a hitch.
Well, I think I agree with you. It seems that they have looked at the world in a few fronts. I think they saw Ukraine being overthrown, meaning the Yanukovych government, and they were able to call that a revolution of dignity and just run with it. Mm-hmm. And so all of the languages like Russia invaded. Well, it invaded a coup government that you guys overthrow. So let's be very clear that the original premise of it, the Ukrainian democracy, if you want to call it that, had been fundamentally overthrown.
Of course.
If you look at what they're doing in Georgia, where they look at Ukraine thinking that's a success, weirdly enough. And so maybe we can do something similar in Georgia. If you look at Romania and the way that they've effectively killed a government in Romania that was supposed to win, the Karl Gorgachku, who was going to win that election before the Ukrainian court stepped in. And so I think in Syria is another good example where they just effectively overthrow the Syrian government without too much fanfare. Look at Israel and the killing that they've been able to do in Lebanon, or for the matter, West Bank, or for Gaza, with the world just kind of watching them do it. And so if you're Trump and you come in and you look at, you're effectively being your vassal and be clearly being your vassal, the amount of money that they're giving to NATO, the amount of money that they're given from the standpoint of energy that they've been, as opposed to getting cheap Russian gas, paying all this money for US gas. If you're Trump and you're thinking to yourself, so I'm not a big fan of NATO, but we need to ensure American hegemony in the region. And so I want an American sphere of influence. So, hey, Greenland, I know you may belong to Denmark, but maybe you shouldn't belong to Denmark. What are they going to do about it?
Right.
And the answer is nothing. That's the rub, right? Like, they've allowed themselves to be so vassalized. And I know that's not a word, but I'm going to use it as such.
Yeah.
They've allowed themselves to get into that spot.
Right.
That now you're so weak that Trump can just, hey, maybe we should take Greenland.
Yeah.
It's just astonishing. I've never seen anything like it, especially not openly said it in those terms. Yeah, overthrowing governments, I get that, but we're just openly talking about taking it. Even Canada, hey, maybe we should annex Canada. Think about it, just astonishing stuff.
Yeah, no, what's funny about the Canada thing is that Trump's rhetoric is, Canada, you'd better spend more on your military or else we'll take you over. But why would it, that doesn't even make sense in a way, because if a country is spending on its own military, you think that increases their defenses, right, against the U.S. But the problem is that the Canadian military is so integrated with the U.S., so taken over, that they see it as theirs already. So, I think the logic there, I think a lot of the logic between Trump always wanting to shake down the Europeans and the Canadians for increased military spending. I think what he wants to do is undermine the fact that in Canada we have and in Europe we have a far more protected population in terms of much more unionization, universal health care, things like that. And I think the U.S. elite have always, ever since the 70s, they've seen that as, we went too far with even what we did up to 1970, and we should be rolling this back. It's too much. I think as a leader of the empire, they want they're more than their vassals in Europe and Canada. They want their population to be frightened and insecure, And I think that what Trump is pushing for is for the Canadians and the Europeans to, through military expenditures, to crowd out the spending that would go towards a better social system and kind of make them more in the image of the U.S. That's what I think. I think that's what I think drives it, because there is a huge difference. I wrote about this in my recent struggles with my health. Huge difference still between Canada and the United States.
Radical difference.
Why should Canada have a much better social system than the U.S.? We're the junior partner. You know, you're the most powerful country in the world. You should have the social system that blows ours out of the water. You know what I mean? But it's not. It's
No, it is the opposite.
Yeah.
But I really see. I think it has more. I don't think the U.S. cares all that much about the Canadian healthcare system. I think what we care about is what Trump is saying is spheres of influence. Whereas he's looking at Europe or he's looking at the US and he's thinking to himself, China is 3 to 4 times the size of the United States, meaning China has what? We have 300 million people. China is like 1.2, 1.3 billion people. They're 3 or 4 times our size. And you think about what is that in an industrial capacity? Okay, well, China can literally arm the world and supply everything that the world needs if it really put its mind to it. It has that many people with that many resources. And then you look at Russia and you say, oh my God, this is a military power that is extraordinarily dominant. They're a 1 million-man military right now. And they are working hand in hand with China in a military and industrial capacity. Okay, what does that look like from the standpoint of the US being able to project power across the globe? Okay, well, it's clearly not what it was in 2000s, and it's even less so what it was in the 90s. I think he's insecure. I think he's looking at a world that has fundamentally changed, where America doesn't have the capability of projecting power in the way that it did. And it's looking at, if we can get Canada and Greenland, we could get back to that good old America and projecting the power with the resources that they provide.
I think those things go together. Wanting to bring, I see what you're saying. Wanting to bring the Europeans and the Canadians as more willing soldiers.
I don't think they care about Europe. I think they care about Canada in order to have this sphere of influence for America.
Oh, sure, but they want. I think they need boots. I think they realize that they need fundamentally. They need manpower. They need weapons. You know, because in Ukraine, I think it showed them that they're basically getting defeated in Ukraine, and it's because you can print money, but you can't print bullets. You can't print soldiers, right?
That's right.
So you actually need resources, real resources, not just financial assets, right? So I think they realize there's a gap there that they're going to have to try to fill somehow. Yeah.
What do you think is going to happen with the Maduro thing? I mean, like.
Well, I'm like I said, I'm very relieved. I'm relieved that like I said, because of all the reasons we talked about, I'm relieved that the inauguration went off without a hitch.
Right.
So in a way, I'm confident. I'm confident that, I don't be overconfident. Sometimes you can be confident right before something horrible happens, but it seems like the military is thoroughly behind Maduro, and the United States has not been able to crack that at all. And their intelligence services are very efficient. They're very, very competent. And, but on the other hand, they have a key ally in Cuba that's going through an extremely tough time economically because of sanctions. Right. And so there's so many things at play. It depends on a lot depends on what happens in the Mideast. Because when the United States is distracted, or the United States has regime change. I can't even keep track of all the destabilization efforts they have all over the world. We can't even keep track of them all because we have so many resources with our allies to undermine countries all over the world. But there are priorities, and if the United States is occupied in the Mideast, or then that could possibly open up some room for Venezuela.
But Venezuela has relationships with other countries around the globe. It doesn't make up the gap for the sanctions that the U.S. puts on. For example, China, Russia, Iran, etc. I know they're further away.
It's a huge help, but you have to think that for 70 years before Chavismo, they built up a system where the Venezuela was so reliant on the U.S. Right? So to undo 70 years worth of that relationship, that's not easy, right? They are making steps, and also I think there's a fundamental issue here too, is that I think overall China and Well, Russia, I mean, they invaded Ukraine. They got involved in Syria, although in Syria they got involved halfway. They still let Israel bomb the crap out of Syria, even while they were involved in Syria. So, but overall, I think China, especially, I think they've been conservative and cautious in dealing with, and I would venture to say too cautious, because the United States is very willing to take risks, very willing to gamble, and I think that China and even Russia, to a point, have engaged in what people call strategic patience. Just patiently build it. But I don't know if that's going to work long term. I worry. I hope it does, but I worry about that. I worry that something more aggressive is required, and that includes maybe more. I mean, China has made moves to help Cuba recently that are very encouraging to fix its energy grid. So that's encouraging. But I wish that would seem. I wish they would do more. Frankly.
Well, the sanctions that Joe Biden has just passed is going directly at BRICS nations. So, they're going to have to do something, right? I mean, like, the reality of it is going after the quote unquote shadow fleet, as they call it, which is nonsense name. But to go after directly to hit the energy that is being transported over land, by tankers and everything else. Well, if you're going directly after the ships and you're going directly after the market, and that market is going towards China and it's going towards India, then it seems like you're going directly after the BRICS countries on this.
Sure.
So it seems like they would have to do something, considering these sanctions are directly aimed at China and at India. I mean, you're going to have to.
But India is close to Israel. Even Brazil, a country that's left of center. I mean, Lula is not the equivalent of Bolsonaro. I don't mean to equate them, but he's played a horrible role since the election. Saying horrible things about Venezuela, disparaging its democratic process, and of course blocking its entry into BRICS.
I'm curious as to why, though. Why is he so hostile towards Venezuela?
Well, he was in jail for a year. He was in jail for a year. He's got the right wing breathing down his neck. He's lucky he didn't get bumped off in jail. What the leaders are up against in Latin America is no joke. There's a whole history to show what can happen to people who are disobedient, right? In case of Petro too, he's played kind of he said some terrible things too, and although he's again not the equivalent of the right wing leaders they've had. I mean, not at all, but still they have like 7 military bases in Colombia. And again, a right-wing movement that's very vicious and breathing down his neck too. So those are real concerns.
Yeah, they're aware. Wow, Joe, man, thank you for this. I didn't have the opportunity to talk to you for a while, but when I saw the Venezuela thing, you popped up, and I was like, oh, yeah, it was like, let me see if I can grab him. Okay. Joe Emmonsberger, he is a journalist and author. He co-wrote the book Extraordinary Threat, The Empire, the Media, and 20 Years of Coup Attempts in Venezuela. Man, thank you for this. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Man.
Great talking to you. Take care.
You too. Have a good one. All right. We have come to the end. I'm going to go through chats. As I say, all chats will be read. Mr. Ripley, we're going to have to service this debt, hence the resource wars, but also the Greenland thing. The United States needs liquidity. The bully pulpit stuff is a lousy way of going about it, but arguably better than sanctions or war. So have you seen recently what Greenland had to say? So they have come out, Greenland, using this as an opportunity to effectively say they want to be independent of Denmark. And on top of being independent of Denmark, they do not want to be Americans. However, they're willing to have conversations. And you can imagine the reason they're willing to have conversations, because if they want to dump money into Greenland, then they're willing to accept you dumping millions or billions of dollars into Greenland to cultivate it, or at the very least to get your hands on the resources of Greenland. They believe that some of that money will stay there. I'm speculating, but I would imagine that this is where the logic is going. If indeed the U.S. comes in, and even if they don't necessarily take us over as like a 51st state or a colony or something to that effect, they may dump a bunch of money to exploit the resources of Greenland, which we ourselves on this patch of land will take advantage of. So Greenland may not be thinking to themselves that they're going to be Americans, but they may be thinking that they can get something out of any kind of investment that the United States wants to dump into it, that Denmark wouldn't necessarily have the budget to dump into it. So that's the way they're looking at it. Now, from our standpoint, Denmark is already a NATO nation. So Greenland is already under the auspices of the US to some degree. But there's a difference between militarily occupying a place versus ruthlessly exploiting it for resources, which is what I suspect Trump wants. Not to mention, as I pointed out before, I suspect there's a bit of insecurity. It's almost like you're standing in a stall and you have somebody like Ron Jeremy in one stall and you're looking down with a little bit of envy at the size of that penis. I think we are looking at the world, and we're looking at a world that is fundamentally different than the world that the US was dealing with in the 90s. And from the US point of view, if we can get bigger and larger and more dominant, you even heard it when Donald Trump was saying, if we can get Canada and Mexico, that is something that the world has to effectively grapple with. Why? Because China is 3 to 4 times the size of the United States, and China is in a close association with Russia at this point. Trump knows it. And so from his point of view, how do I keep America safe in a world that is being confronted by these other nuclear powers? I think that has a lot to do with it. So there's that. Not to mention, we're able to shake down Europe like nobody's business at this point in somewhat of a humiliating fashion. Viva Pacifico. Welcome to the show, man. Welcome to the show. Welcome to the family. Thank you for joining this family. All right. We have come to the end. I want to thank all of you that watch. I want to thank all of you that support this content, whether it's just a view, whether it is a like, or whether you're buying me a cup of coffee, whatever that is. I do appreciate it. If you dig this content, you find yourself coming back here often, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell so you can hear and get a notification when I log on. I log on from 7 to 10 a.m. Monday through Friday, but I also pop in all sorts of the times of the day and night. So definitely hit the notification bell. If you really find yourself digging the content, you can support it through PayPal, Patreon, or Super Chat, or for that matter, you can become a family member. All chats will be read, providing you're not racist, sexist, or bigoted. I want to thank all of you for joining me today. I have my first chess lesson that I'm going to be giving today, or the very first chess lesson from the standpoint of the show. And I'm going to meet that gentleman at 11 o'clock. We are going to go through a power demonstration. I need to see where he is before we start any kind of lesson plan. But if you are interested in learning chess, I've started a new chess channel where I'm going to be doing chess videos, chess content. It's basically, I call it a love letter to chess. But that's where I'm going to be doing any kind of analysis with my class. Because I've had some people who want to have this kind of virtual chess club. And so the more people that I get for lesson plans, the more I can organize that into this kind of chess club where we have live videos. I'll try to get the channel on US or chess.com. It should be good. It should be a lot of fun. And I'm hoping that's something that we can grow. I'm hoping something that could be grown. Yeah. But I'm going to end this. I'm going to say like, share, subscribe, and I will see you guys tomorrow morning, bright and early, 7 a.m. to 10 a.m. Have a fantastic day, guys. Signing off.